final day of ETS23. Thank you for sticking with us all this time, coming out here and the final conversations about energy. Appreciate all of you who've been here and who've been watching on the live stream. I'm Dylan Lockwood, senior editor of Z Prime, and thank you. And we're going to be kicking off today with a great conversation. I have here Christine King, the director of the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear at the Idaho Research Laboratory. Give it up for Christine. Yeah, so we're here to have the nuclear conversation. It's been like hinted at, danced around, but we're really getting ready to dive into it. I'm excited. How about you, Christine?
Of course, we need power.
Nice.
So no, I'm excited to be here. Sorry I wasn't here with you the rest of the week, but let's see what we can do first thing this morning.
Yeah, I mean, so, I'm a millennial, and like most millennials, the nuclear conversation was quiet by the time I was already an adult. Most of what I know about nuclear energy came from watching The Simpsons, and they called it our misunderstood friend. Which is probably kind of apropos. So, Christine, how has the conversation around nuclear evolved in this era of increasing decarbonization?
So, unfortunately, pop culture doesn't always help nuclear. I will say the radioactive waste is not in barrels with green leaking goo. But if we want to talk more about that, we can. So the conversation is really changing. I think the way to think about nuclear energy as an enabling technology in our progress towards decarbonization. And as you know, if you've been looking at decarbonization, it's different in every region of the country, and everybody has different resources available to them. So nuclear becomes an excellent partner to allowing us to deploy as much renewables as we can, and as well as replace the fossil and still have the stability on the grid. And then as you go further into the decarbonization equation and really achieving a clean economy, the hardest sector out there right now is going to be our industrials. And that's the beauty of the new nuclear fleet that's being designed and demonstrated this decade, which is it's not just about producing electricity, it's about that thermal energy that you can dual purpose with. And how do we make use? So by being able to dual purpose, we have that flexibility and dispatchability that we don't have with our existing fleet.
And it's decarbonizing not just the grid, but all kinds of other stuff. Because we were talking about that over breakfast, and you're like, your background as a chemical engineer, and all the ways that like these kinds of technologies can help with other non-electrical energy processes. Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah. So my background is a chemical engineer, and if I was to put myself in the shoes of someone who's been producing high quality steel with a good profit margin, right? The last thing I would want to do is to have to redesign that process. But if you could give me the same input, right? If you could give me the same energy, but it's clean, then that's a conversion that I can get behind. It makes it easier to make that conversion. Recent announcements here in Texas have been Dow Chemical is going to build one of the first demonstration, a high temperature gas reactor with X energy. And that is 100% about decarbonizing their industrial processes.
So to kind of prompt the question of the session title, do you see the role of nuclear in the grid as playing sort of a different part than in previous incarnations? And what does a nuclear inclusive future grid look like?
So again, I think a nuclear inclusive grid is different in different parts of the country. So let's talk first about states with aggressive decarbonization goals. Where nuclear plays a role, and I mentioned this before, is a partner to that reliability and backup to renewables. And I also think it's fair to say, I'm going to sit here and talk about nuclear because this is my 30th year in nuclear, so clearly I like this technology. But energy just in general, there is not one part of energy today that is not being innovated. So I think as we progress to a clean economy as energy professionals, we need to keep all of the above, right? If we end up in a clean economy, to me, you have a diverse power supply, right? Because our climate is going to change and our needs are going to change along the way. So I see coming back to a state with aggressive decarbonization goals and wanting to do that quickly, the challenge becomes you get to about 80 to 85% of a decarbonization going to 100%. And you're challenged with overbuilding to get the same performance. And that's where nuclear or long-term storage batteries can come into play, right? Carbon capture and sequestration, if we could get that to something that is economical to deploy as well, that could come into play. Where it's different is our states that are economically dependent on fossil fuels. So think about Wyoming and Kentucky and Pennsylvania and West Virginia. These are coal states. So fossil fuels is the center point of their economy. So when you're talking in those states, you need to be engaging with economic transformation. How do they continue to be energy exporters and industrial and manufacturing centers, but do it with clean energy? And in those states, that's where nuclear can be, again, because of that dual purpose, supporting the increased electricity demands, but also helping provide clean electricity for industrial processes.
So, what you were talking, you're talking about how you were talking about like the different how we're innovating different aspects of the grid, different technologies and generations. We haven't had much nuclear discussion yet at the conference, so I'm curious what some of those innovations and technologies are. How is the actual like processes and look of nuclear changing?
So what's different? And I apologize, I didn't answer that question just before, but thank you for reminding me. So what's really different? So when you think about a nuclear power plant today, you're probably the first thing that comes to mind is the hyperbolic cooling towers, right? Everybody that and the containment domes. So what's different is we're building much smaller units and designing much smaller units. That's going to enable a couple of things. One, again, kind of going back to replacing fossil fuels and coal, because of the smaller plants, we'll have a smaller footprint. And we'll also actually match the grid capacity for many of these fossil fuel stations. So our mid-sized units are somewhere between 300 to 500 megawatts, which is about half the size of our existing fleet today. The other aspect is they're being designed with flexibility and dispatchability in mind, which is what we all need in a grid of the future, right? We need all of our resources to be able to operate on fast ramp rates. And that's not something that we have with our large light water reactors today. The other really interesting piece, if you go all the way to the smallest end of our scale and you think about microreactors, microreactors are in the 1 to 5 megawatt range. And this is where you can really start to get into distributed grids and building in remote locations. One of the demonstration projects that's underway right now is with the Department of Defense. It's called Project Pele, P-E-L-E. And they are embarking on having a transportable microreactor to support their defense. And this is not for the energy that it provides, but by eliminating the need to transport diesel to the front line for energy, it actually saves lives on the field. So there's a lot of different products which nuclear hasn't had in the past.
Sorry, you said transportable, and then you said it was like replacing a diesel truck. How big are we talking, actually?
So these reactors are envisioned to be in the back of an 18-wheeler.
Wow. So, you know, one of the things, you know, when people talk about nuclear, there's a lot of like key issues that I think people still get kind of apprehensive about, like cost, scalability, but also like safety and fuel acquisition, and of course the waste in the oozing out of the barrels on the cartoons like you were talking about. So how have folks in the nuclear sector been addressing some of these issues, and what progress is still being hammered out?
Well, so we talked about this at breakfast as well. One of the challenges for the nuclear industry is we've kind of been flying under the radar for decades, right? We've been a consistent part of supplying power in the United States and internationally, but we've insulated ourselves as an industry. And so we haven't done a good job speaking publicly about our technology. And that's something that I personally spend a lot of time trying to change. I love my nuclear colleagues, but most of the time they start with 15 decimal points in their pocket, and they want to tell you about their really cool reactor technology that they're building, instead of how you might envision using that technology and how it fits in, right? And I think that's one of the most important parts. Relative, so you had a lot stacked in that question, so I'm gonna just start to break it down.
Yeah, for sure.
So from a safety perspective, I think, you know, this industry, I kind of liken it to airplanes. Unfortunately, though, when you get on the airplane, like the pilot doesn't remind you about their safety record. That's, you know, you have a safety briefing, right? But it's not, hey, our safety record has been really good. I think in nuclear we need to actually stop talking about our safety. Our safety record is second to none. And in terms of energy density and the amount of energy we provide versus any safety incidents, to whether it's to our workers or to the public, you know, that's, like I said, that's a record second to none. And with these new reactors, we're taking advantage of the actual physics. So in some cases, some of these reactors are being designed such that as the temperature increases, the reaction will naturally shut itself down. Or we're engineering them in such a way that the heat is, if you were to lose all power to the station, the water would continue to circulate and cool the core through natural circulation. So those things being incorporated into our new designs makes a big difference as well. All right, I'm gonna skip to the end, and we're gonna talk about waste, and then I'm gonna come back to the beginning, because I just wanna kind of keep you guys awake and moving around. Okay, so going to the end about waste. Okay, so the Department of Energy has the obligation to come and pick up the nuclear waste, which they're not doing such a great job about. Please don't call my federal manager and tell them I said that. But where we are is we are storing the nuclear waste at site, at each location. Okay, so let's go back to the green leaking goo. What is nuclear waste? Nuclear waste is actually a ceramic pellet inside tubes, zirconium tubes. Those tubes are about 30 to 40 feet long, and they're arranged in a square array of about 17 by 17. That's a fuel assembly. Okay, so we take those fuel assemblies, we cool them in the spent fuel pool for 5 years. When I say cool, that's about thermally cooling them, not radioactively cooling them. And the one thing to know about our waste today is there is a significant amount of fissile material. So there's a lot of potential energy still left in those fuel pellets, even after we've pulled them out of the core. So they spend about 5 years in the core, and we change out about a third of it every cycle, every 2 years. So after 5 years or so in the spent fuel pool, they get loaded into stainless steel casks. Those casks are, the water is pulled out, the air is pulled out, and inert gas is put in, and they're welded shut. That is then placed in either a vertical or a horizontal concrete cask. You can walk up and stand right next to it, and these are on concrete pads. They're waiting for the government to come and pick them up. So where are we with consolidated storage? How many know about Yucca Mountain? Okay, yeah, okay. So Yucca Mountain was the original place that we thought we would do geological disposal. With the decision not to pursue Yucca Mountain, the DOE has just initiated consent-based siting. That starts with setting up the framework, not having the conversation about where we want to put a consolidated waste facility, but setting the framework for how we have a public conversation and make that decision, and ensure that wherever that consolidated fuels facility is, that everyone is making an objective and conscious decision about that. Where we're headed with waste is really kind of, I think, an opportunity. As I mentioned, our current waste has a lot of fissile material, so we could close the fuel cycle in this country and recycle it. And in closing the fuel cycle, we can take the waste that we have today and turn it into inputs for these new advanced reactors. Many of these new advanced reactors are operating at a higher enrichment level. So today's reactors have about a 3 to 5% enrichment of uranium. The new ones will be up to 20% enrichment of uranium. So that's really kind of the opportunity that we have. That there's a big important decision, and we're not in Europe. There are several countries that are already reprocessing their waste and recycling. So it's from a technical point of view, we know how to do it. It's more of a national decision. Do we want to close our fuel cycle? That leads to, I think, what we've all come to realize, unfortunately, as a citizen. I think we've all learned more about energy independence and energy security. And that's an aspect as we move forward with nuclear, is understanding how this technology can help us achieve that as well. I think I covered all of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted, a couple things I wanted to just circle back to about what you said. So just to clarify, you were talking about these like consent-based disposal sites, which that's a good development. What sorts of areas are being looked at for these kinds of things? Like, I assume it's not just like a simple application process. I assume you're doing some outreach on this.
Well, so the outreach right now is really about setting the framework for what that conversation will be, and how that public conversation should happen, which I think is a great, so I'm sure as you guys have issued RFPs, one of the first things you do right before you receive your proposals is decide what your scoring criteria is going to be. It's kind of like that. Like, before we get into the conversation, let's decide what is the right way to measure this? What is the right way to make this decision? I think I'll get back to you on this, but I do believe the comment process is open on consent-based siting right now. That is an open conversation. I hesitate because this, while I'm talking about this and aware of this, this is not an area I work in.
I see. You were talking about safety, like the high safety record, and then energy security and things like that. One thing that can make those conversations difficult for someone in your position is the idea that, like, the safety rate can be really high at these places, at nuclear facilities, but when there are failures or disasters or sometimes targeted sabotage, like you saw attempted in like Ukraine and stuff, those can be catastrophic to communities and ecosystems for decades. Like, they're very famous examples that I don't need to go over. So that I think scares people. So how do you have that kind of conversation when people have that rejoinder to the admirable safety records you mentioned earlier?
So you can't hide behind your safety record.
Right.
Okay, I mean, and we do have to be honest about the challenges associated with this technology. I will say the design in and of itself is your first barriers. There's also a fair amount of misunderstanding in terms of the actual impact. So again, pop culture hasn't necessarily been our friend. The Chernobyl series and the 3 Mile Island series, okay, how many people watch those? Okay. The nuclear industry has also published, as politely as we could, okay, so this is real, this part is not real. You know, they are making movies. All of that, though, it starts with not hiding behind that safety record, acknowledging that it is absolutely natural given where we've been and where nuclear came from. Nuclear, most people, I mean, I know you know it from Homer Simpson, but most people, especially in the United States, know it from weapons, right? We tie nuclear technology to weapons, and we have not done a good job of differentiating. And there is a very large difference between the nuclear technology that you use to develop weapons versus what you use for commercial and peaceful use. And we have had a lot of successful peaceful uses of the technology. But we have to engage in that conversation. You cannot set aside someone's fears. My hope in the work that I do is, as I go out and talk about nuclear technology, is that it's especially something like this is the first conversation, right? I want to create a curiosity in the technology so that you can become comfortable with it and make an objective and conscious choice to host it. If you're not comfortable with the technology, I think you move on to something else. I think that's the right thing to do. Any technology that people are hosting in their community, they need to be comfortable with it.
Yeah. So. No, I think that's right. I think that's the best way to have a conversation is honesty, and yeah, understanding that risk factor. So we have a little bit of time left. I did want to know if anyone has any questions for Christine. We got one in the back here.
I'm glad you can see that. These lights are kind of bright. Oh, yeah,
hi. Hi. Good morning. My name is Gail Wooster. I'm from Power System Consulting. And you were talking about Pele and some of these advanced reactors. All through the week, we've talked about the pace of change. And I love the idea of having a really diverse generation mix, but how long do you think it's going to take, if you could predict, for some of these advanced reactors to actually be available?
So we are in what I would call the decade of demonstration. And really where we are as a market is we have a good number of demonstration projects going on, full scale commercial demonstration projects going on. And what needs to happen, though, is unfortunately, nobody wants to be number 2, number 3, right? Everybody wants to buy the 10th unit, just like we saw with renewables, right? You need to drive. That's where we are in nuclear technology today, is looking for what is our early adopters, right? And how do we start building beyond these first units of these advanced reactors? If I was to make a prediction, I believe, I'll talk about the momentum I'm seeing in the states. There are 12 states that have initiated advanced nuclear feasibility studies. And that was just in legislation last year. We haven't closed the legislative calendars for 23 for many states. And we're seeing more states that are diving in to understand how this might fit in to a regional plan. I say all of that to say we've never seen this amount of momentum for nuclear. I believe we will be ready for scale and deployment in 10 years.
Thank you for the question.
And you can bring me back for the 20th anniversary and we can check on that
Yes.
prediction.
Well, yeah, we'll see you in 10 years to see how that's going. Any other audience questions? Oh, we got one over here.
Hi, you mentioned how difficult it is to be a 2 and 3, but what do you see from a federal level as we're seeing so much money coming out for lots of energy initiatives? Is there money that you expect will be coming towards some of these nuclear technologies as we look at all of the IIJA and IRAs, all of those?
Yeah, there's a significant amount of money, and what I like about the federal policies that are coming out is that they're actually, for once, listening, and they're technology agnostic, right? So we're talking about the parameters of what we want, right? We want clean, affordable, reliable energy, and if you fit those profiles, no matter the technology, there's dollars for demonstration, there's tax incentives. So the IRA put out a production tax credit for clean energy. So 10%, if you're building new clean energy, there's a 10% production tax credit you can get at the end of your project. What was announced earlier this week from the White House is if you are building that clean energy in a coal community, you can have another 10% production tax credit. That is the closest I have seen for clean energy being on sale ever, right? I mean, so I do think, and the work at the federal government level really is focused also on where are we going to do this. So it's not, which is very different for the Department of Energy and the national labs for us not to be just thinking about it at a global level, but really getting into the details of where are we going to do this, what does it look like in each region, how do we build models that help people do scenario planning. But yeah, I think the amount of dollars, I will tell you just one of the best things that they recently did, I think it was either in all these laws are starting to blur in my brain, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act. It actually provided the funding for the completion of our two large advanced reactor demonstrations, one in Wyoming and now one here in Texas with Dow Chemical.
You said new clean energy, nuclear energy. I feel like there's a branding opportunity there.
Yeah, okay.
We got a question in the front here. We got one over there. We got one over there, and we got one over here. All right.
Hi, can you say a little bit more about the water demands of these new technologies?
Yeah, great question. And so there's twofold. One, I'll give you some statistics from the Wyoming project. That's TerraPower. They're building adjacent to the Naughton coal station. They will use 2/3 of the water that the coal station uses today to deliver the same amount of power. Now, the folks in Wyoming will tell you, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, right? and that's the reality in the West, is being water constrained as we try to decarbonize. The other aspect is a lot of these technologies, you are able to actually operate air-cooled as well. You do pay a price on efficiency, but you could design and build them with air-cooled systems. You still will have some water usage, but the major water requirements would be reduced. But these new technologies will use equivalent or less water than our existing plants. Yeah, that's compared to current nuclear and current coal and gas requirements.
Excellent. I'm sorry, I know we have more audience questions, but we are out of time. But Christine's going to be around, so yeah, grab her ear, because I know from experience that you love talking about this stuff to people.
All right. Thank you so very much.
All right. Thank you, Christine.
All right, good morning. How about that opening fireside chat? So, for our next session today, while we readjust the stage, we have a great group of panelists who have tremendous insight from around the utility space and really around infrastructure, grid modernization. So, leading us in this conversation today is our Director of Research and Innovation, Joyce Dooley. So please help me in welcoming Joyce Dooley to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the fourth day of ETS 2023 and our 10-year anniversary. Apparently, today is the weirdest day yet, which is kind of hard to imagine, but very excited about that. We're going to be talking about infrastructure modernization on this next panel, and we have some really interesting perspectives. I think we're going to get into some cool details and all kinds of things. So if you would please give a round of applause for our speakers. We've got Kimberly Britton, the CEO of Epicenter, Dan Foreman, CEO of Copper Labs, Nate Gillespie, Director of Customer Solutions for Pepco Holding, Angie Ostaszewski, Energy Efficiency Consultant for Ameren. Round of applause, please. All right, good morning. So I've been asking everyone on my panels this question because I love to hear the answer and to get to know them as people before we get to know them as professionals. So Kimberly, would you start us off? What energizes the work that you do?
Well, I think for Epicenter, it's really, we're an energy innovation center, and we work with a lot of utilities and matching their innovation aspiration to their reality and aligning those with their strategy. It is not honest. I used to run SAM, and I didn't look. I trusted. Trust but verify, right? So you may have heard that because I speak loudly, according to my mother. But nonetheless, for Epicenter, it really is with the utilities that we work with, it's aligning their innovation aspirations to their everyday reality. And that really is energizing to us. It's exciting to see it happen. So.
Great, thank you. Dan?
Good morning. For me, I think we're all here because we recognize that we're in the middle of a climate crisis and we need to do things. And I've been working in tech startups and early stage venture-backed companies for more than 20 years, and there are a lot of ways to spend your time, and I think few are more substantive than this. And so, utilities need a lot more solutions than what they've had available to date. And so I'm glad to be part of a lot of good early stage companies stepping in to help.
Thank you so much. Angie?
Hi, I'm Angie Ostaszewski. I work for Ameren, Illinois. I said this earlier this week in a session, but we're basically the utility that's not covering Chicago and Illinois, so the rest of it. I am newer to the utility space. I've been at Ameren since 2016. And before that, I was in community and economic development work. And it can feel really futile when you're trying to work on housing, workforce development, safety, and all these things all at the same time. And it feels like you're almost like digging at the beach, but it's always very shallow and the sand keeps falling back in. But what I love about being in energy is one where we have to figure out how to serve everyone. So you can't make the argument that certain customers don't apply, and we can deeply impact one area that's really key in someone's life. And I found that what we do at my company is much more impactful than the work I was doing before, where we were trying to be holistic, but it was kind of like we weren't making a lot of progress anywhere.
Thank you. Nate?
I'll say, so I'm Nate Gillespie. I work for Pepco Holdings. One of our companies, not in Pepco but Exelon, has the rest of Illinois.
We can share.
I would say there's two things that, through my career working in the utilities, first of all, I'm a marketing professional. First time I worked for a utility was PECO in Philadelphia, and I remember thinking that, wow, the biggest emergency I ever dealt with was the website wasn't working for a few minutes. And now I'm in an environment where I'm sitting in an emergency operations center, 911 center, in the middle of the night because there's a hurricane coming through. And it struck me that what I was now doing touched every single person. Every single person that lived in my area was my customer. That's a different perspective from a normal marketing person. So that was one thing that actually gave me a lot of energy and really excited me about the work. Now I've switched more toward, we're on the edge of the utility industry completely changing. The work that I'm specifically doing in PEPCO with solar interconnections, in particular energy efficiency, to start working toward electrification is really exciting, and it's not easy. It's difficult. It's a difficult challenge. The challenge that I have is that we're working in multiple jurisdictions, so you have different areas that have different goals, different regulatory structures. It's kind of exciting and really energizing to like weave that needle and get everybody what they want.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So as you can see, we definitely have different perspectives and backgrounds here, so it's going to make for a very interesting conversation about infrastructure, right? So how does infrastructure modernization impact communities in the long term? Angie, I'd love for you to kick it off with your background and set the stage for the next phase of the conversation.
Yeah, the conversation about infrastructure modernization and including our communities, I feel like the biggest challenge or the biggest piece I'm thinking about is utilities like to be in control. We like to control the process from start to finish. And if we're really going to look at infrastructure with our customers, we have to figure out how to talk about it in the scope of the world they live in. So if you're having an open house about some kind of grid modernization in your area, personally, I as a customer wouldn't have gone before I worked for Ameren. In the neighborhoods I live in, what our residents care about is we're in communities that don't have cars, but we don't have sidewalks. We don't have good street lighting. Our bus stops don't have shelters. The roads are crumbling. And so having to consider this sort of energy upgrade totally separately from the rest of your life is not how people think. But utilities have to give up a lot of control in the conversation and be willing to slow down, partner up, time our projects, bring in folks who are working on these other pieces, and be willing to speak up on behalf of our customers to push for those other upgrades as part of, you know, a holistic community that we're trying to build together. And I still think culturally at these companies, we're years away from effectively doing that, but I think it's certainly much better than when I started a few years ago.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, to Angie's point, there are a lot of different people out there that can help utilities meet the moment on the energy transition, and yet today it's been about fancy in-home smart home equipment. It's been about EV tariffs, and there's a lot of other folks that will engage. And so, you know, we've worked with a bunch of utilities on behavioral programs, and you'd be pretty surprised the number of people that will lean in and help, whether it's to avoid an outage. But the one predictable thing about human behavior is we tend to respond to incentives. You know, if the money gets high enough, they'll do things. And so there are all sorts of non-wires alternatives, non-pipes alternatives, if you can engage people in a way that works for them. And a lot of folks don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have the money for a smart home. They can still make a lot of decisions to help utilities flatten those curves, create load flexibility, and avoid outages. You know, we see, whether it's the emergency text system in California last summer, you know, a lot of the things that go on here in Texas, people are willing to engage if you can find the right incentive structure. And there are a lot of creative ways we've seen utilities do that, but there's a whole lot of them available that haven't even been tapped.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nate?
I think one of the things that you're seeing as we're starting to pivot, one thing I was thinking about is we've instituted chief customer officers to make sure that the voice of the customer is moving through the organization, and they're tasked with making sure that you're putting the customer first. I would say the old way was of a position of no. I would hear that from my team a lot. No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that, because, and that comes from the history of our responsibility, is keeping those lights on all the time. So when you're in a place where something new is threatening your ability to keep the lights on for everybody. And I don't think people understand that. It's not necessarily that there's a concern about decentralizing the energy. It's, well, what happens if you don't have that control and this supermarket with this solar array trips off this transformer and 50,000 people are out. So it's not that supermarket that's in the news. It's not the supermarket that's hauled in front of regulatory bodies. It's the utility. So making sure that there's technology in place to be able to allow for some of that stuff to happen.
Thank you. Kimberly.
So all of this is, I mean, absolutely meaningful. I'm going to, for us, I will shift the conversation a little bit to say that we went from grid modernization, meaning the vetting and potentially operationalizing of emerging tech to serve their ability to serve their customers, to be more reliable, and to drive toward affordability. In the last 2 years, year and a half, we have watched the why of that conversation shift to resilience. And so that now the focus is, yes, some things may be cool and interesting, but if they don't make us more resilient in the face of these storms, these outages that we're facing, and this I'm not only seeing in Texas, I see with our client in Washington State. I mean, we're beginning to see this being the mantra, that if it doesn't serve that, then that grid modernization may be helpful, it may be important, but it's not satisfying that core why of why we need to move and move faster than, I mean, their time is running out for this because they are being hauled up. I think those of us in Texas are acutely familiar with that.
Great, thank you. So, you know, we all know that cost is a huge barrier to this, and it's a necessity that has to, I mean, it has to happen somehow, some way. So we're not really going to talk about that today because it's one of those things that I don't think any of us have fully figured out yet, but we'd love to. So if you have a brilliant idea, let us know. But what are the biggest challenges besides cost to modernizing the existing infrastructure, Nate?
I'd say one of the, it's related to cost, but it's really in the regulatory space, getting the freedom to be able to have flexibility. I think flexibility is key when you're in an environment that is very prescribed. It's legal. These are legal proceedings that are very specific. So being able to write in and have that trust that you should have that flexibility to do what's right for the customer, do what's right for the grid. That's one of the, I think, the keys to moving forward, and that's stuff that we're working on. Stakeholder engagement. You have to build the trust. So if you do not have the trust in the community, it's going to be very difficult for you to say, hey, great idea. We're going to modernize the grid. We're going to go do this. Well, you didn't deliver on this, 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 and this. Why would we trust you to deliver on that? So this is something that is going to take some time if you're in a bad space with your customer base and your stakeholders, but socializing what your intentions are, making it very transparent, and engaging them in the conversation. Because one of the worst things that can happen is that you're about to cite a large project, and the community says, no, we don't want it there, and puts a halt because you didn't engage them in the beginning.
Great, thank you. Angie.
I'm going to half answer your question and half just jump on my little soapbox about data.
Please do.
Digital infrastructure. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to my soapbox. So in my role at Ameren, I manage our market development initiative. And essentially, since 2018, I've managed contracts with about 40 nonprofits. Back in 2018, it was like really in startup mode. So I came from a program management and marketing background, and a lot of what I ended up doing was contracting, invoices, memorandums of agreement. I never drafted so many contracts, and I was the one area in my group where all of the contracts were direct with the utility. And I think sometimes we talk about, you know, these tangible things we can see and feel, and in order to even get to that, we have to get a contract. And in order to contract with a nonprofit or small organization, for them to have a compensated role in the conversations or the programming you're doing, you first have to educate your system within the utility on how do we adjust. We're not going to give a $5 million cyber insurance requirement to a nonprofit that doesn't have an IT department. Like, we're just not going to do that. So how do we move forward with, I think a lot of times when we talk about data at the utility, it's how can we make it as secure as possible, as safe as possible. But then how do you balance that if we really want to be integrated partners in our community in terms of working together? And so what we have done is we've had to change our procurement process. We've created custom contracts and really had conversations about if you're working with a community action agency to do outreach on a grid modernization project, at what point does their client data become utility data? Because utilities think any data that touches us is our data. But these are agencies that already have this information in-house. And if you can't figure out how to partner with them without burdening them with all of these requirements and intimidating pieces, that's also part of being a good partner in the community. And you have to take away, we're very process oriented, right? We always want to scale things and make it more efficient. But in cases like this, you really have to look at it from top to bottom on a case by case basis. And that can be a challenge to, it's kind of a change management project. But that's a really big part of my job that I never thought would be a big part of my job. And if anyone wants to nerd out about how to write a contract, let me know. No one's going to talk to me after this session.
Thank you so much. Kimberly.
I think in addition to the financial challenge, which is huge, right, is the other thing, our time. With, they're keeping the lights on during the day job is already a challenge. The aging infrastructure is already at, we talk about technical debt. You're at an infrastructure just from the age of, you're an age debt, I guess, for lack of a better term. You're not starting from here, you're starting from here in some cases to bring some very old infrastructure to where you need to be, whether that's your technical infrastructure, your physical infrastructure. And then your human capital piece, right, of who's on deck to handle the work that's ahead. We recently did an overhaul. A utility had spec'd, it's hiring for the rest of 23, for 24 and 25. And so one of the things that we spent 4 days with them was realigning, because one thing they asked the question, do we even have the right position specified to do the work that we need to do for whether it's handling this infrastructure piece or the softer skills, if you will, of our future. And so we spent 4 days with them overhauling how they thought about workforce. That's a non-traditional thing for us to do, but it's a critical thing to really make sure that you're deploying the human capital to match all of the other technical pieces or the structural pieces.
Great, thank you. Oh. Sorry, that distracted me for a second. Dan.
Yeah, for me, it's time, and we're out of time. It's easy to say let's electrify everything. But I think we all recognize that there's a big bunch of things that would have to happen that are impossible to do that. And so what's the answer? And the answer is that you find your way to the middle. You have a reasonable conversation around what can you do with what you already have. And I think that one of the limiting factors for utilities has been a handful of very large vendors that have all marched in the same direction. And the world's changed. We can't say, hey, when I get to a shiny future where I have AMI in 5 years, for example, all my problems are going to be solved. I think we've all seen that it hasn't really solved problems to date, and so maybe we should think about where could that money be better spent. And we think that money can be better spent on digital solutions that create load flexibility, engage people. And I'm self-interested here. I can unlock real-time data from pretty much any meter out there, and so if you can make the demo legacy meters smarter than the newest smart grid, why not go spend $500 million on things that actually move the needle? Build places where you can actually get density on EV charging. And so there are a whole lot of new things that are available. I think that for companies like ours, and we're a venture-backed startup. We've got investment from some of the biggest funds out there, National Grid, and yet I need a megaphone to get attention. And to Angie's point, we spend a lot of time in utility procurement and just absurd requirements like, hey, we need you to get $100 million worth of surety bonds to do something that doesn't rise to that level of need. And so whether it's rethinking what we've always thought, this is the single line we need to walk to get to grid mod, or this is the way that our contracting works, you are blocking out a whole lot of opportunities if you put up these barriers that Angie's trying to knock down, for example.
Great, thank
I'll
you.
give that to you. Let me talk to them.
Angie's going to handle it. Thank you so much. So modernization is kind of a big, broad, fancy term for all kinds of things, and there's lots of different ways to approach it. And it's not to say that anyone isn't doing it well, but it is a big, hairy thing to contend with. So Kimberly, how do utilities best approach modernization?
Well, you're going to hear that saying I love to say about, I stole this from my friend she's a retired Air Force pilot. And she says, in the Air Force we say there's a lot of thrust, but no vector. And there's a hand signal, a lot of thrust, but no vector. And I think that there is, and I think it would be insulting to say that utilities don't have vector. But I would say that there is a lot of activity and thrust and resources being spent that don't always support the stated strategic objectives of the organization, particularly around the things they consider to be innovative. So part of the goal is to encourage, to support the utility sector as they align that thrust with, because you can't do everything. It's huge, right? The burden of what you have to face to do your daily job and then also be innovative, and the pressure to comply, and the lack of sometimes understanding of your regulators, all of that's a challenge. So what do? You pick the things that move the needle the most, and this has been said. You pick the things that align with your strategic objectives, that will move the needle the most, that in a year or two you can point to that and say, that made the difference for us as we advance our modernization, the improvements to our infrastructure, and serves our customers better. And if you had 3 of those wins in a fairly compact period of time, you will be able to move on to something else. Now that's a perfect world, right? But that's really what I'm finding, is that there's so much noise. And where we best serve our friends and our clients in this area is to help dial through that noise and bring focus to this incredible work that you all are doing.
Thank you so much. Dan?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, to Kimberly's point, I come from an agile software development background where, instead of spending 18 months and thinking, I can predict the future, I'm going to lock everything in, we'll march for 18 months, and when we get done, we're going to have a perfect product. The world changes faster than that, and if you can break things down incrementally, I think it also motivates the internal innovation teams at utilities. You need wins to stay motivated, and if you have a 5-year project, you're going to get dragged into the mud. Invariably, things change, and so finding ways to break things down iteratively, incrementally, and whether that's with internal innovation teams, rolling things out to your customers and learning from them. One of the things that we regularly talk about is turning ratepayers into collaborators, and when utilities do that, it tends to work, and I think it's been proven out, and it's just not been propagated broadly enough around the industry, and so I'm happy to hear you helping to do so.
Awesome. Nate?
I think your comment about a lot of thrust and no vector, I found myself in that situation where all of a sudden a lot of attention came to my area as I was stepping into the role with community solar. You've got a lot of initiatives, and once they start rolling, it starts making quick impact. So when you've made adjustments for 10 customers, and then now you have 20 customers, okay, we can deal with that. All of a sudden, when there's 1,000 different units, that's IT systems, and you can't necessarily you can predict where you need to go if you have that vector where you know where you're headed. But if you're trying to keep the wheels on the car as you're running, it becomes a little bit difficult sometimes to see where you're going. So after we had some struggles in that space, a lot of attention was there. A lot of resources started becoming available, and it's like, okay, what do we pick? So going through and trying to figure out how do you get those quick wins, because I thought you need to make some improvements. You need to show that we want the process to be better. We want to encourage this. And one area, very simple, it doesn't have to be super innovative, but one of the biggest things that we realized was a problem was in an interconnection process for a DER to connect to the grid, there's 17 different departments that are involved. There's, on my own team of people processing that application and walking it through, there would be maybe 4 people that would touch it. So I could never find out who was responsible. So if someone complains and says, hey, we need this PTO right now, it would take 4 hours for someone to tell me who to ask. And so simple, innovative thing was, okay, one person's responsible. You own this application from start to finish. And that made a vast improvement in communication and trust, to build the trust with the people that are working with us, to be able to show that we can start making improvements here.
Awesome, thank you. And, okay, Angie?
Can you say the question one more time? I just got lost in everyone's answers and I forgot what even was the...
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, I was asking, like, how do you think utilities can best approach modernization from your perspective?
Okay, thank you for refreshing my memory. So the other part of my job at Ameren and Energy Efficiency is pilot design, piloting new programs. And so I probably shouldn't say this as an innovation professional, but something I've seen, and again, my short time in the utility, is sometimes we want to go for something shiny and new and we completely forget about the basics. It's like icing a cake that hasn't finished baking. I don't know if that's a good metaphor, I just made that up, but some of the things that, you know, we're trying to push folks to look at when you're looking at modernization is you're still dealing with customers who have knob and tube wiring in their home. I still go into customer homes and we're trying to weatherize it, but first we have to get rid of a roach infestation or a hoarder. And when you're thinking about modernizing the grid, those are the homes you're connecting to, and it's easy to get wrapped up in the sort of technology piece of it or the improvement piece of it, but if we don't stop and look at that, it's usually the least efficient housing with populations that have the highest energy burden and the lowest income. You know, what are we modernizing this grid for? Reliability, but also affordability for those folks. And so we have to figure out how to tie all of that together. And a lot of times it's not pleasant to talk about in a workplace, you know, gross things. I mean, I've worked on mobile homes that had dozens of dead animals underneath. But that's the world we live in. So how do we factor that into this like clean and shiny conversation?
Thank you so much.
Just a quick comment on that. So when you talked about the knob and tube wiring, this is something that was actually new to me. So we're talking about electrification and how we're preparing for the future. And you have programs for low-income customers, and we want to focus on trying to electrify them first so that they can start receiving the benefits of that. But the knob and tube wiring, the cheapest way to go in there is wires on the surface, and they don't necessarily want that. Is that fair? So there's where I thought, oh, this is great. We're going to put money toward panel upgrades and stuff like that. But now you have another blocker. There's just so many things that in that space that you have to plan for. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to do it equitably to make sure that they can take advantage just like anybody else?
Awesome. Very great points across the board. I have one more question for our panelists, and I do want to open it up for questions from the audience, so please be thinking about your questions. We'll bring a mic to you. Would love to hear your questions for these wonderful people up here. So the last question is, what do you feel is missing from this discussion? Kimberly.
Culture. Because if you, you know, it's like there's an old proverb that says that if you put new wine in old wineskins, it's gonna burst, right? If you've ever made wine, you know, wine expands, it fizzes, it has gas to it. And I think in some cases we've tried to take this innovation culture and superimpose it over a more traditional culture within the utility sector. And one of the things I've been struck by this conversation is you have representation from a very technical sector. A lot of, you know, engineering staff, teams, focus. But the conversation has been about those softer skills that I mentioned earlier. It's about focusing on the needs. I learned when I worked for a big public hospital in my formative years. And I was a community relations person, and I would walk into their homes, and I didn't come from the same world that they came from, but I learned so much about the way people live and what to talk to them about what they need, even when I was working in oil and gas, because we would go into the neighborhoods, and until someone has the humility to ask what they need, what's going on with them, how this change will impact them, making sure that people can adapt to it, then you're not successful either, right? I couldn't accomplish my goals, my requirements of my employer. And in a way, that's really what you're facing in the energy sector is adopting these more, not just innovative, cool ways like Silicon Valley stuff, but it's really about this softer skill about being able to approach your work in a way that takes into account not just the measures, the electrons that you're moving, but how you deploy those electrons. It's a different day. And the ones who will do that and adapt to deploying people who come from non-traditional backgrounds the fastest. I've recently met with this very successful in terms of their innovation and modernization, this utility in Canada. And their driver is a leader that they hired who comes from the social sciences background. And that's terrific. And many of you are doing that. And in fact, to Nate's point, you came from a background that was non-traditional as well. But it makes the difference in terms of how we deploy those softer skills these days.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I would agree, and to expand on that, I would say regulatory collaboration is missing. And one of the panels yesterday morning, a guy joked that vendors might want to start showing up at NARUC, and I show up at NARUC. I've got a former regulator on my board, and I've in recent months spent a lot of time briefing state-level regulators, which is not something venture-backed startups typically have to do. But the thing we found is that there is a huge disconnect between what's possible, what utilities think they're limited by, and what regulators actually want to see. Because regulators are rightfully setting the guardrails to make sure that we get safe, reliable energy delivery, but they're also driven by public policy mandates. And we have an affordability crisis. We have rising rates. And so the thing that's been interesting to me is those regulators are starting to pull us into these conversations now, bring the utility to the table and say, hey, did you know this is possible? And so that's the first step. We certainly need regulatory reform. I mean, when utilities don't have the ability to capitalize SaaS spending, which is software as a service, meaning you don't have to build a data center, you don't have to install it, you don't have to make someone run it, you just turn it on, just like you would watch Netflix. You can bring those types of capabilities to utilities right now, and I can tell you that most of the regulators I talk to would like to have that conversation.
Awesome, thank you. Angie?
What Dan said, no. Although those are great points. Urgency. Do you guys know that meme of the dog in the room on fire and the dog is saying, this is fine? Okay, thanks. I heard a chuckle, so someone knows it. I feel like that's my professional life. It's like, in some ways it feels like the world is ending, and how are we going to promote sustainability in a way that people care about, even with all of these more severe weather events happening? Customers aren't necessarily connecting that to the grid, to reliability. They're not thinking about it. And I don't personally think that the utility is the entity to make that connection for them. But if not us, who? We still have to spearhead that happening. So how do we message that, and how do we, frankly, make people care about something that they just don't really care about? We do customer segmentation, and we looked at all of our customers' data. Most of them don't care about sustainability. About 20% of them we identified as eco-aspirers. They want to be more sustainable. They want to take care of the planet, but it just really isn't a consideration. And I think for all of us working in this industry, we don't want that to be true. We all deeply care, but I think it's good to start from the reality of we want people to give a hoot about something they don't give a hoot about. And so where do we start?
Thank you. And Nate?
I think I'll echo some of Dan's points with the regulatory collaboration. I think we need to really make sure that that relationship is evolving, and it's not a us versus them. When we've had that opportunity to have collaborative conversations, usually there's much better outcomes. And I know that there's different views on how close can your regulator be to the people that they're regulating. But making sure that there's that open communication and understanding what we're all trying to get to. I think the point about regulators being more educated on what's out there, a lot of times based on past histories and say rulings and stuff like that, utilities may be concerned about bringing something forward. We need to kind of break out of that cycle, and I think that would make a big difference.
Fantastic, thank you. So hold your applause. We're not quite done. We do have time for questions. So now it's your turn. Anybody got questions for our wonderful panelists? Alec will be bringing a mic to you. We couldn't have covered it all. We did cover it all. Okay, so fantastic. I can ask one more question that I had in the pipeline. Just let me unlock my phone real quick. Technology, y'all. Okay, so let's just wrap it up with final thoughts. Let's just do that. Dan.
Sure. I would say, you know, the low-hanging fruit is just to widen our gaze and think, you know, the world's changing faster than we can keep up with. There's a whole bunch of new stuff out there, as we've all talked about, and I think the challenge is figuring out how to create room to, you know, again, as some folks said yesterday, fail fast but fail small. And, you know, we see this happening in places like Connecticut. I think it's Pura that's sponsoring some innovation programs, and that really, you know, to Nate's point, it takes that leash off of the utility and says, okay, here, you've got some room to go and test things. And any other major business in the world has digital transformation programs underway, and utilities are unique in having these limitations that are put in by the regulatory environment. But there are ways to free this up, take those small risks, and again, regulators are looking to have these conversations.
Fantastic, thank you. Angie?
Yeah, I'd like to expand on that a little bit. I love that we're talking about changing your regulatory environment. I think a lot of us are always trying to affect change within the scope of what we already do, and with where we are in the world, that you can't go as far as you need to. But piloting and testing things is not always natural in the environments we work in. Since I started managing pilot launch for Ameren last year, one thing I realized is I examined all of the pilots we did before 2022. And what I learned was they weren't really pilots. We were just like, this is new. Okay, now it's a program and we're running it. It has goals, and we're just gonna see if we meet the goals or not. That's not a pilot. We need to do things smaller. We need to set learning goals, and we need to position failure as the expectation. Because often when we say it's okay to fail, okay, but you don't believe that though inside. You're like, I want to do it right. But if you start with that expectation of, we don't have a goal, we just want to learn, and we want to run it smaller, that's a big culture change, at least for the company that I'm in. But I think that's a way that we bring in smaller vendors into the conversation, because when you pilot small, the contracting terms are more reasonable. It's going to allow us to work more quickly, be more efficient with our resources, and with our ratepayers' money. But you have to really change your organization to be able to run like that.
Thank you. Nate?
One of the things I'm really excited that a lot of this talk is all in preparing for how we're dealing with climate change, and that's something I'm really getting excited about, that all of the programs that I get to put forward for modernizing our infrastructure, for helping customers achieve their goals, help our states, our country achieve the climate goals that we have. And it all starts with that backbone, and how is that prepared as quickly as possible to move us into the future.
Great. And Kimberly?
If I may, I heard
please.
something from Angie here that stuck with me. It's, you know, taking the idea that here's some new thing, all these other utilities did it, let's just go big and wide right now and hope for the best. I was at an EEI conference last year in Orlando, and there was a great panel, including the chief customer officer at National Grid, basically being lambasted by, nicely by the rest of the utilities, saying, "Oh, well, you don't have smart meters yet." You don't need smart meters to solve a lot of these problems, and of course that's a provocative thing for me to say to a lot of people in the room, but it rhymes with what Angie says of, this is the only way to do things, and that must change.
Well, that tees me up for my remark beautifully. In fact, each one of them has said something. So whether it is piloting and having that mentality of the intention is to fail, which is also very uncomfortable for everybody, or that you don't have to do things the same way, or that you're making an impact in a new way to drive toward climate change. For me, what this all comes under, and what I watch folks, our friends in the utility sector do a lot, and we get to do with them, is flex new muscles. Is really what we're talking about, is building strength in areas that are new and different and sometimes uncomfortable. And one of the other areas that I'm finding is, I love the idea too of taking a different approach to regulators, but also in the sense of, one of the things we're also hearing that we haven't talked about yet, in terms of infrastructures, all this federal money that's coming down. And I have a colleague and I in Epicenter. Between the two of us, we have about 50 years of experience, and I don't even want to talk how we allocate those years. But in grant work, right? And so it's very challenging to dig through the noise. But that is another place. Demonstrating value is a new language for some utilities as they approach to seek either buy-in from stakeholders, change from regulators, or funding from the federal government or state government. Not that you have not demonstrated value to stakeholders in other ways, but the way you have to do it and the way you have to cut through the noise about what demonstrating value in other people's terms. So what I'd love to sum this up is what I am thrilled to see and excited to be a part of is this building new musculature within this industry to change and grapple at the speed at which the change has to occur. And so I'm encouraged, and I'm excited about it, and I love being a part of it. So, and thank you, Joyce.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we're a couple minutes early. I'm gonna do one more sweep of the audience just to make sure I did not miss anybody with these bright lights. Any questions for the panelists?
And if there's not, can I make a somewhat related, somewhat unrelated plug?
Yes?
Okay, cool.
Oh, we do have a question. Fabulous. Thank you.
Hey, I'm just wondering, as someone who works for a DERMS, but it's not quite a DERMS, building solutions for utilities, I've learned that they don't like to call things pilots because it takes extra paperwork. How do you communicate that idea of we're going to do a little chunk and we're going to test and learn without going through the whole spiel of what it is? What do you call that?
Limited deployment.
A limited deployment.
That's one.
That works. Other ideas?
Don't even call it a pilot, because everyone imagines something different when they think pilot. They do think it's going to be cool and techy, and that's not even necessarily true. There's a lot of things you can pilot that aren't technology. So we've been saying test, and we've created an entire way to do implementation planning that's different, because typically our team sits down, it's like deliverables, energy savings goal, budget. We really have to completely remove that from our mindset. So something that we're doing that's really hard is creating an implementation plan for a test without any deliverables. And then people are like, huh? I don't know how to write this. I write from the goal backwards, but it's an interesting exercise.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes learning is your deliverable.
Yes, that is the deliverable, but it's so squishy. Business people hate that, yeah.
That's true.
Okay, excellent. Let's give them a round of applause. They're fabulous. Thank you so much. And I think Ricky is coming back to the stage. Nope.
Can I
Aaron. Oh,
quickly
sorry.
mention,
Yeah.
we have 3 RFPs coming out of Ameren, Illinois, and I came here seeking folks to bid on it. So I just wanted to mention, if you're in the area of smart home, healthy homes, or looking at leveraging all of this new federal funding, we are looking to identify a grant writer to help our network of nonprofits to apply for all of these new dollars. as well as folks to specialize in smart home with an application for adults with disabilities. And then healthier homes is new to our portfolio. We haven't done really anything with it yet, but if that's your jam, please talk to me. I'd love to get you on our list and make sure we have some great submissions so that it's a great program for our customers.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, and coming up to the stage is going to be Erin Otan. She's going to be leading our next discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce. Thanks. Hello. This mic is not on.
Do you want to use mine?
Hello. I think it's on now. Okay, there we go. All right. Yeah, we can just do these middle ones. Yeah. Thank you, Joyce, for the introduction, and I'm excited to be back again this morning. Day 4 of ETS, and a lot of y'all have been here since the first day, so just want to give you guys a shout out and say we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. We are about to have a great discussion here. I think we've heard a lot about resilience throughout this event, and with all these extreme weather events happening more often, especially in Texas when we had Storm Uri 2 years ago, I think since that storm, I've heard more about demand response than I ever had before. So we are going to have a great discussion about demand response. I've got Cheryl Melly, the VP Customer Care and Corporate Communications from El Paso Electric, and Eric Rayberg, Chief Engineer and founder of Armada Power. So could you guys just give a brief introduction to start us off? And Cheryl, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's great to be back here at ETS Year 10. Fabulous work by all of you guys. But my role at El Paso Electric includes energy efficiency, customer care, deploying smart grids, or deploying the smart meters out there, even though I just heard that we don't have to have those, but they certainly will make some things better for our customers. In a communications team, and we're really working hard on making sure that we are bringing El Paso Electric, kind of modernizing the infrastructure, just like the last panel said, but really also really getting our customers to trust and engage with us, because you really have to have that engagement in order for the investments that you make to really have payback for the customers. And so we'll talk about a little bit more as we go.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Eric Rayberg. I'm the Chief Engineer for Armada Power. We develop a technology for controlling things like electric water heating in real time for the power grid. So our mission is to really make electricity more renewable, reliable, and cost effective. And I think it's going beyond kind of the sort of traditional thought of demand response and really turning things into active grid storage assets.
Great, thank you. So speaking of resilience, what would you say is the role that demand response plays in resilience? Kind of a broad question, but.
Yeah, I can start if you'd like. I think of resiliency across kind of 2 dimensions, right? So there's how do you prevent things from going wrong, and what do you do when things do go wrong? So, to prevent things from going wrong, if you think about it, the fastest way to take down a power grid is to get supply and demand out of balance, right? If you have too much demand or not enough supply or vice versa, that's how you crash the power grid. And so today we can sort of support that by having lots of dispatchable generation. That's how we've done it for the last 100 years, where we can make up all these small fluctuations as we turn these bright lights on, right? Some power plant somewhere has to work a little bit harder, when those things turn on. Or we can manipulate that balance through electric loads as well, but it requires a lot of speed and responsiveness. And then the second part is, if we have like rolling blackouts, which have actually occurred a lot more, I think, across the country in the last couple of years. Anybody that's done like a storm restoration before, it's like very difficult to actually bring something back online because you don't know how much load you're going to get when you close that switch. And so what if all of the electric loads out there could also cooperate with you and say, hey, we're going to hold off. We know you just closed that breaker, that recloser in. Let's not trip something out again and start over.
Yeah, I think that those are all exactly the right thing, right? Protecting the grid, and I also look to resilience to be kind of something that, again, requires partnership with customers, right? Because I think a lot of times there are, customers just think they should be able to get everything they want all the time, and that is always our goal. that there are moments in time because of the extreme weather or because of perhaps a piece of infrastructure that's out, that, you know, that resilience piece actually has to be a little bit owned by customers as well. And I think that's the interesting work that you're doing, is really trying to, you know, portray that, you know, resilience really is all of us coming together. We're always going to design for worst case. We're always going to operate the grid in the N-1 and make sure that everything is ready to go. But resilience is being able to tolerate unexpected things as well, and weather the weather, which we're seeing more and more is the cause of some of our major events. And it's also resilience down at a distribution level. And we're seeing, I think, a lot of innovation on the customer side of how does a grocery store become more resilient? What types of applications do they have that could be demand response when we need it, but it also could be resilience at an endpoint that needs that. And so I think the grid and innovation is really helping us with all of those things as we move forward.
We have a good example of resiliency here. We were laughing because our clock died, but the wonderful AV folks have dragged a digital clock up here on the screen. So,
Yeah, thank you guys.
You're responsive.
it's resiliency.
So, Cheryl, you guys at EPE don't yet have, not all your customers have smart meters. You're sort of in the middle of rolling out an AMI project. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, how it's going so far?
Yeah, I'd love to say we're rolling it out. We are preparing to roll it out. And we've talked a lot about, you know, big technology projects can, you know, always perhaps maybe you either have the vector or you have the thrust. You don't always have both, right? So I think that was a good analogy of, you know, we kind of know where we want to go, but we approached our project by, first of all, having to have a place to put all of that meter data, right? And so a couple of years ago, El Paso Electric decided, well, if we have to have a place to have all that meter data, we might as well change our billing system, and we might as well move that to the cloud. So we are happy to have gone live with our Oracle system in the cloud, and now we're still working through getting the meter processes in terms of being able to do those full exchanges to our customers, and we hope to do that later this month. But we're excited about the meters themselves, because I think that we will benefit, I think, first from all of the data that brings and really understanding our customers' loads and usage a little bit more at that detailed level and being able to dig in and segment them. But I think it's also the reality that the average person isn't going to get that excited about it the way we are, right? They're seeing that charge on their bill already of $2 a month, depending on if it's Texas or New Mexico, 20 cents in New Mexico, $2 in Texas. And so right now we're going to have to work hard to get them engaged in that. But we are excited about getting that data and then really being able to deliver to our customers a lot more information. But I think the challenge for us, honestly, is once we leverage the good information for us and for our distribution team to operate the grid that's now two-way with lots of EVs and, you know, 140 megawatts of solar out there on rooftops, it's going to be us figuring out how to engage our customers, because I don't think it's just natural. I'm the geek, and I look at my little app and I see what comes in. I'm like, oh man, I've had that electric car for 3 months. You can't even hardly see the blip. Why didn't I do this sooner? But I don't think that I'm the average customer, because I've just been in this business for way too long. And so I think that's really a challenge. And I think the last panel, I think with Angie, I think she really hit the nail on the head of, you know, you bring all this stuff, but you got to figure out what to do with it. So we're excited to get it. I'm excited to really have an impact on our customers, but we're going to have to really work hard on that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that philosophy, right? It's not just like putting the gadgets out there, but you're thinking through the infrastructure and the business problems that you're solving and putting it all, you know, essentially that whole package together. So it's very wise.
Eric, from your perspective, what are some of the barriers that customers face when, you know, they've got their new smart meters and these programs are available, they maybe want to sign up to enroll, but what are some of the barriers?
Yeah, I think a good thought experiment here would be, how many of you in the audience know what your electric utility account number is? Anyone's raising their hand? All right, I don't see anybody raising their hand, because if you did, I was going to ask you to recite it. But I think that's really interesting, right? This is the fourth day of the conference. The only people that are left here are all the like hardcore energy nerds, right? You guys are all the biggest energy nerds we could possibly find, and none of you know what your utility account number is. So why do we require people to have that piece of information to like sign up for something like a demand response program? I think that's one of those challenges where, you know, and you're thinking like, oh, I signed up for paperless billing, I can download a PDF of my bill, I'll look it up. Yeah, you can absolutely do that, but most people probably, you know, would have a hard time doing that. So you end up cutting out people that would have otherwise potentially signed up when, you know, you can sign up for electric service without having an account number, obviously, right? So how do you get people to enroll from what they know in their wallet?
They know where they live. And I did find out that we have solved that net because, you know, customers don't know their account number. I don't know mine either, but I do know my address. And so our customers can actually enroll in our program either with their address or their account number. So, you know, maybe that explains some of the popularity of our demand response and thermostat programs. But a lot of times on a lot of other programs, even reporting an outage, sometimes we want people to tell us their account number. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm in the dark already. Right?
Right, how do I go find like my last bill in, you know, the junk drawer or something like that?
And how can, you know, companies like yours or other technology service providers kind of help overcome some of those barriers?
Yeah, I think it's that partnership and really being flexible in the way that you design programs to hit a wide swath of people. So one thing that we've seen very successful is actually going after things like multifamily, which have been sort of a traditionally underserved, you know, population from, you know, things like utility programs. And so there's an opportunity where you can basically get, you know, one sort of property owner on board with, yeah, I'm good with all this equipment coming in, but then creating ways to allow things to be, you know, sort of opt-in at like lease signing or, you know, incentives that kind of have to go out to, you know, maybe residents can be like a gift card, but, you know, if you're going to say go to a landlord, they don't want to get paid with $25 Starbucks gift cards, right? So being flexible in the way that you can kind of actually structure those programs and recruit people has been really successful, at least from our perspective.
What about actually engaging with the customers? How does El Paso Electric go about that to kind of educate them around these programs that are available?
Yeah, we actually, I think that we are working hard to get better at that. But, you know, sometimes things just work really well. We serve New Mexico in addition to Texas, our 10,000 square mile area. And I'll tell you, the folks in Las Cruces, they are geared up about electrification. And New Mexico is pretty geared up about renewable energy. And so we've had just great success in the past several months where we've been off to, you know, kind of really engage with them on their Power Up Las Cruces thing. And, you know, part of it's just being out there, I think, is what we find is that, you know, the more people know you and trust you, and you have a relationship with them, we're starting to see some of our traditional, like, you know, folks that didn't support our programs, even though we were bringing them good things, storage and solar and, you know, all kinds of great new energy efficiency things in our portfolio. So I would say that we're leveraging just that, get out there and be with people. Be out at the community fairs, you know, really help them understand, get those electric vehicles out to the farmer's market, promote your thermostats, your refrigerator recycling. And so that's how we're trying to do it. We're also talking a lot about, you know, yeah, we operate the power plants and the emissions come from the power plants, but we only respond to demand. And I think you really have to make it personal and bring people home. I think that somebody was talking about the segmentation. There's people who, I'm all about sustainability, but when it comes down to my personal discomfort or I have to do something, then maybe I'm really just thinking about it, but I'm not engaging in it. And so we're trying to really help our customers understand that every time we turn that last light on when we already said that, you know, we're kind of maxed out here, that if they would just gain some trust with us, we can have, I think, better conversations about, we only need you to do these little things. Sign up for a whole house EV rate because, you know, that means you can charge that vehicle all night after midnight until 6 or 8 in the morning and we'll all be better off. So it really is about establishing the relationship for trust. And that's not always easy, but I think that once you get a little momentum there, I think communities really do rally around it and more messaging about peak demand, right? Peak is just a little bit of time. We have to build the wires, the power plants. We could do a lot more if we didn't have to build for that little peak.
Any thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, one of the big pieces is, in our philosophy has been to be as non-invasive as possible, because you're right. I think people want to participate and make a difference, save money on their bill, but at the same time, there's a tolerance range that I think people have for discomfort and adjustment in their lives. So the more that you can do to really be as invisible as possible. One of the things that when we roll out programs, a common question that utilities will ask us is like, oh, well, what's your recommendation on like notifying customers that we're doing a demand response event? And honestly, I'd say if you're calling a short event, I wouldn't say anything. Like, you can go a couple hours of something like shutting off an electric water heater and no one will notice. And we have the telemetry to know that if they were going to start to notice, like if your program was getting too aggressive. So, it's sort of that balancing act of like, yeah, we want to sort of reach out and talk to customers, but there's also sometimes value in not talking to them when you're not going to, make them see ghosts when there, isn't anything to see.
Yeah. If they're already enrolled, right? Then it's like they don't need to know about every little bit, but that's great. Great point.
So you said balancing act, and one of the sessions I was on the other day, they talked about, resiliency and decarbonization kind of being a balancing act. So how does demand response contribute to utilities' decarbonization goals?
I'll start with that way, and I think that, again, it goes back to, are people aware of what happens on the grid? And they're not, right? So we just have to talk about that. We do have some gas plants that are, 1950s vintage. Those are grandfathered units. They emit carbon, more than the brand new one that we're building. And so when people, I think, understand and can put the pieces, one of the other things we've done is really start some customer advisory partnership groups to extend the reach into the community about what that stuff means. And so getting our own customers out to some of these facilities and getting them to think about it and look at it, they're like, really, you turn that on? Yeah, we do, when everybody's, really, peaked out. And so part of that is, I think, trying to continue that journey of educating people on what that means, because there is a lot of opportunity to reduce our carbon footprint just by people paying attention. Sun's going down, you may have solar on your roof, and even those customers who seem like they should be educated because they've got solar on the roof, they've got the EV in the driveway, they still don't get it, right? Well, I have solar, so it's okay, right? Well, no, you're actually making us do a lot more of that emission if you don't also look at how you use energy in your home. And so we have that opportunity to really get people more information, and that's why we hope the smart meters help us do that. Mm-hmm. And then we've got to do good campaigns that really educate people on what really happens with solar and what really happens when, we don't try to at least follow that or add some storage. But they're connected, right? They're very connected, resilience and the carbon and the sustainability goals that we have.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think the irony of this is it's actually not so much of a technological problem anymore. It's a communication and metrics problem. So, I think when you look at like the regulatory world, right, we've really focused a lot on metrics like energy efficiency or kilowatt hour reductions, or potentially in the demand response world, like a KW reduction. The problem with that is it's only focusing on one measurement point, one number. And it's kind of like back in the early 2000s when digital cameras were getting really popular, and every year they made more and more megapixels. And so for a period of time that worked, more megapixels was better, but then there was this period where like cameras actually got worse because they tried to squeeze too much into that, right? Instead of actually looking at other qualities which are more complicated to explain. And I think carbon efficiency is one of those exact sort of same situations, right? It's not just enough to say, oh, we're shrinking energy use, because every kilowatt hour isn't the same, right? So if you can produce a kilowatt hour from a renewable source, having that dynamic timing to where you can actually absorb it may or may not even be on peak times, right? It could be sort of solar sponging in the middle of the day. But that's a lot harder to explain to like both regulators and stakeholders and stuff, that this is actually like a dynamic level of control, not just one number that we're trying to measure against.
So what about equity and access? How does demand response, what is the role of demand response in promoting energy equity?
I think, energy equity is, I'm sure there's been a lot of discussion about that this week and how that's rolling out into different communities and what we're doing about that. But to me, energy equity, you talked about multifamily and getting thermostats and water heaters in there. That's a lot of where we've got to, I think, do better work, right, landlords, and how we engage in that, because the easiest way for a lot of people to participate is just by having that thermostat, right? They don't maybe have to have a big expenditure, and we put those thermostats on sale through our marketplace several times a year where you can get them for like $24 or something. But I'd also love to see that become part of the LMI programs where those are just free, right? Because even when you replace your system today, you know, you're like, wait, you're just going to give me a controllable thermostat, not, you know, a default to a controllable one instead of just one that, you know, I can get all those buttons and time it and everything. I really want that product, and I don't think our customers do either if they have the option. But I think just the cheapest way for people to participate in that resiliency is to let them have that thermostat while we're also doing the weatherization and other things so that they can feel like they're now high-tech and they're able to participate in that future that we all are, you know, kind of aspiring to. And it's very affordable and an easy way for people to get involved.
Yeah, that's just the natural fact that it's one of the most cost-effective ways is already makes it easier to deploy. And then the second piece is, I think, you know, giving consumers a little bit of control. You know, I think electricity is one of those where you kind of show up to the buffet and you put a whole bunch of food on the plate, and then they weigh it, and then they charge you. You know, you're like, oh, that's like a lot. I'm gonna put a few pieces of shrimp back. Like you can't do that, right? You pay the bill at the end of the month. And so a lot of people, like if you have something like a time of use rate or even a dynamic, you know, rate, that's cool, but they don't have the ability to actually change their behavior to reduce costs. So the more we automate that, the easier it becomes to actually be able to deploy that equipment and then also have a cost impact to customers as well.
And I think there's also a lot more opportunity there to, you know, you get your one time a year, you know, participation, you know, card back from us. But I think that there's also a lot of opportunity because people don't always have a lot of time to just find ways that help to give a reward back more frequently than, you know, kind of that incentive piece, right? You know, how do we move beyond everything having to be just that upfront rebate or incentive and really get people to get benefits back when they do things? And I think that would go a long way towards helping, not just from an equity perspective, but all customers really. You know, we all love to win. Who doesn't love to win, right?
Yeah, then you're more top of mind too, because it's not just like a one-time thing or a once a year thing. But yeah. We do have a few minutes left. I've got a couple questions left, but I wanted to see if there were any audience questions out in that sea of lights. Jason's got a question up front.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Eric and Aaron. Cheryl, questions for you. As in this last storm, where were some of those? Did El Paso Electric feel some of that? And if so, what are some of the lessons learned from that storm, the most recent one?
Which one was the last one?
Oh,
good You question. Mean the big Uri, or do you mean the one that you had here in Austin?
The one in Austin.
Yeah, no, we were fortunate. We did not get hit by that event that came through the central Texas area. You know, there's some nice things about living in the desert. You know, we don't have too many of those big trees until you get up into our beautiful mountains in New Mexico. But yeah, we were spared from that one. And also Storm Uri, where we felt like, you know, diversity really came in handy, fuel diversity during that one, to have nuclear, natural gas, renewables, and, you know, tanks full of oil sitting next to our gas turbines.
There's one question right here.
Hi, how are you? I was wondering, do you foresee a future where all of this technology is getting to a point where the utility doesn't need permission at all for residents to participate? Because already, if you don't have enough power, or if there's some problem, the residents aren't getting power. So, what is that fine line where utilities can just say this is a terms of service where we reach a certain metric, possibly push a state regulator to agree, and that's just it, and then they just get a coupon at the end of the year, or for their participation, for participating in the wholesale markets. Do you foresee that?
I think it's a fascinating philosophical question for sure, because you're right. Like, at a certain point, if you don't cooperate, you know, we just shut power off because we can't support it. So it would benefit everybody if there was a dial somewhere in the middle. There could be a potential for that. I think the key, if we were going to look at ways to do that would be really to focus on that like kind of non-invasiveness as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, you know, the homeowner or consumer can just wire around whatever countermeasure that you put in there if you're trying to force some sort of behavior. So it still has to be that kind of cooperation. But I think it's a super interesting idea of like where do you actually blur that line of control and you know, who has the ultimate authority to control things like electric loads.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we see a little bit of that with the grid mod discussion in infrastructure, right? The first place that utilities can do that is with volt bar optimization, where a customer never really even knows that we're doing something to manage the grid besides just keep, you know, generating more to meet their load. But I do think that is an interesting question. And he mentioned the water heaters, right? We don't have a lot of electric water heaters, but as Las Cruces and New Mexico really get, you know, deep on the electrification issue, they're already starting to develop some all-electric neighborhoods. And so those are places where we would like to be cooperating and looking at that. And I think electric vehicles, for sure, are going to be one of those places where if you're a residential electric vehicle charger and you've got a you know, enabled device there for managed charging, yeah, why would you have to opt into that sometimes, right, if you're on during certain hours? But I think it's a great philosophical question, that if we're not cutting it off, do we have to really declare an emergency, or should the utility just be able to operate the distribution as, you know, to optimize it?
Yeah, and volt var control is an awesome example of that. That's perfect, yeah.
All right, I'll ask one last question. So seeing as it's our 10th anniversary of ETS, and Cheryl, I think you've been at almost all of them. There's maybe been a couple that you missed, but so in the spirit of looking back a decade, so much has changed over the past 10 years. What do you guys think is in store for the next 10 years?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. You know, it's always tough to say, right? Because we're seeing so much kind of like new technology, and you know, everyone was like, you know, everything's gonna be blockchain a couple years ago. Now it's gonna be, you know, AI and all this stuff, and there absolutely could be huge impacts to our economy. But I also think there's something to be said for, let's also not forget cool like low tech stuff, right? Like demand response in the grand scheme of things is actually like relatively low tech, but it's a really effective solution. And I think like, you know, the over dependence on AIs and data analytics is going to be kind of fraught with some issues in it. And if we look at a future where, you know, things like computer-aided reasoning is just super duper abundant, the irony of all that is the scarce resource is actually going to be, you know, human intuition and decision making. So can't lose sight of that despite all of the kind of cool new technology that might come out.
There is, but I think if you look forward 10 years, I think that we're so much further along on our journey to, you know, the cleaner grid that we're aspiring to. Unfortunately, we're not going to have that modular nuclear until at least 10 years from now, I think is what we heard in the first panel of the day, which I think that's really exciting technology. And, you know, the thought that that will be a part of that clean energy future, I think is something that we probably have all been thinking about, but maybe not trusting. But I think that, you know, we finally are getting to a place where that might be the reality, and I think that will go a long way. I think that we will have more electrification, so I think the grid is going to need continued investment, and that is actually going to be one of those places that really does demand that we really focus in on customer education. And hopefully customers are much more self-serving and, you know, digital, so that they're really helping us drive the cost out of business. I know I closed my walk-in centers last year in Texas, this year in New Mexico, and you know, it's amazing how even though a regulator or, you know, a legislator or somebody might think that's going to be a big deal, customers adapt. And so I think that customers will continue to adapt and want to participate. But you're right, it has to be easy. And, you know, some of it has to be behind the scenes, but really giving them more information more frequently about what they're really doing, and being able to give them predictions and information that helps them make easy choices when they're sitting on the couch at night watching Netflix. Oh, look, El Paso Electric's telling me if I was on this rate, I would have saved $5 this month. You know, they shouldn't have to go to my website or call me and do that. So I'd like to think that we really can lead the way in making sure that we're partnering to those types of realities. I'm just giving you the information, and, you know, take it. It's $5 a month. Why not?
All right, well, thank you both so much for joining me today. Please give them a round of applause. And We are up for a quick networking break. We'll be back in here at 11:15. Thank you, guys.
Hey there. Well, you caught me on a funny day. A humorous one. A friend sent me all these jokes. A theme about the ocean. Sea life and fish.
welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice networking break. If you want to go ahead and find a seat, we'll be getting started with our next session. So we have a pretty exciting group for this next session titled Creating a Culture of Innovation Within an Organization. So we talk a lot about innovation here, how we get there, best practices, what those look like. So please welcome Mark Podorsky from Bridgewater to the stage, who'll be moderating this session.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. How are you this morning? Good. Well, not too bright and early, but for us West Coast folks, this is still pretty early. So, thanks, Tim. So probably my favorite subject today, in a word I heard mentioned at least 3 times this morning, everything from the grid mod work to the nuclear discussion this morning, the word innovation was used. And I think it's great that our topic here this morning is innovation. And so today I have, 3 experts on innovation, and we're going to hear kind of what they're doing and their thoughts around that life cycle. So first, I want to welcome John Kochevar. We like to call him Coach. I just learned.
Thank you, Mark.
I just learned that 5 minutes ago. John is the Vice President of Customer and Digital Solutions and CIO of Portland General Electric, where he's responsible for customer solutions, supply chain information systems, 900,000 customers in Oregon, so pretty big. They are looking at being very aggressive in decarbonization targets, reducing greenhouse gas, and serving their customers with those reductions by 80% by 2030, correct?
That's right, Mark. Yeah.
Okay, next to me is, I won't tell him your nickname, Kim.
Thank God.
But next to me,
we're allowed to keep it weird here, though, so.
well, that's true. That's true, but I still don't think you want me to use your nickname. But this is Kim Getchen. Kim has become a good friend of mine over the last day. Kim is CEO and founder of Innovation Force, where she is reinventing the innovation process to help utilities make that transition to the cleaner, more reliable power faster. Real quickly, pretty cool achievement. Kim was recognized for her leadership of the Clinton Global Initiative project to build a predictive grid, and publicly recognized by Bill Clinton himself, President Bill Clinton himself. So congratulations, Kim, and welcome. Last but not least, David, we'd like to welcome David Wade. David Wade is President and CEO of EPB in Chattanooga, a world-class energy and connectivity provider. Many of you know Chattanooga as America's first gig-speed internet service. David led the planning and deployment of EPB's community-wide fiber optic network, which now offers speeds up to 25 gig. So welcome, David, as well. So some good thought leadership up here. I'm going to start, and maybe we'll start on that and work our way down. We heard the word innovation mentioned. David, we'll start with you. What are some of the drivers out there that's driving innovation, and who should we be talking? Who should we be bringing to the table to help facilitate these discussions?
I think you actually bring lots of folks to the table. The more you bring bring lots of folks. But I think one of the things that's drivers ends up being how do you position organizations? I think that becomes a pretty big driver because, it starts with what's the mission of the organization? What are they trying to achieve? And for us, our mission is to improve the quality of life in the community. And so we have a mission that pushes us to the future and not a mission that constrains us to what's happening tomorrow. Although tomorrow is important, it's a year or two down the road, or 5 or 10, that becomes even the bigger picture. But I think, creating that organizational drive to be better and to look to the future and what that can be. And how do you get more people in your organization excited about that? That to me is one of those challenges as an organization. Sometimes it's just letting folks have the opportunity to make decisions, whether they're big or little. And I think that is one of those drivers that pushes innovation in an organization that has a lot going on, is allowing folks to do things, even if it's stuff that appears risky to you or stuff that you wouldn't do that way yourself. So I think one of the drivers is giving folks opportunities.
Okay, thanks. Kim, I know you and I chatted a little bit last night, and I know you've got some thoughts around this as well.
Well, these are the true leaders on the stage, and I'll bore you guys with some of the data. So our company went out and surveyed some trends in innovation, and we asked who owns it, who participates in it, and then who is accountable for it. And so this is what's going on in your workforces, so be aware that 1/3 of the folks surveyed said everyone participates in it, and then 1/3 of the people said, well, everyone owns it. So then who's accountable for it? 1/3 of the people said no one. So what you're seeing on stage today is leaders who are futurists, who have been able to bring innovation into their organizations. And I think my message is brainstorming is not always performing. So we have to build process, procedures, and discipline to make innovation a repeatable and dependable business process for the organization that you all, as managers, can trust. $1.7 trillion is spent on innovation annually, yet only 6% of CEOs are satisfied with their organization's ability to innovate. So it really comes down to how do we build discipline, process, and procedures so we can create those opportunities that David's talking about, and you can really empower your innovators at the front line. You can decentralize the process, democratize it, but empower everyone to be able, who's closest to the problem, to come up with the solution, and then you can manage it and you can actually measure and manage what's going on inside your organizations with a repeatable, dependable process with KPIs and measurement.
Wow, I think that's great. Good point. You do have to measure, or you don't know you're making progress. Yeah. John, I want to pull you into the conversation on this. Agree or disagree with the discipline?
Yeah, I will build, I think, on David and Kim's comments. I will tell you from my perspective, and I'll share a little bit more about Portland General. I think we were the first. We might still be the only U.S. utility that signed the climate pledge, which says we're going to be zero emissions by 2040. So this is not net zero. This is zero emissions. And in fact, we work with our legislator in Oregon to actually put that into law. And so that means 80% decarb on a 2010 baseline by 2030. I think part of innovation, in my opinion, and at least at Portland General, is setting ambitious goals, like setting that BHAG, right, that big, hairy, audacious goal, because that's how you're going to attract and retain the best talent. So that's number one. Number two, Kim, you talked about ownership and accountability. Like, that is giant. And I'm not talking about a team, I'm not talking about a committee. It's a human being. Who is the human that's accountable for delivering specific measurable outcomes? And then the other thing that I would add is when we think about outcomes, at PGE at least, I think about the 4 M's. It's going to be money, megawatts, minutes interrupted, metric tons of CO2 equivalents. And so I'll just unpack that a little bit, if you'll allow me to. Money, we talked a lot about affordability for customers. We're an investor-owned utility, so money goes in all directions. One is trying to do things to achieve customer outcomes affordably, and two is you got to drive returns for investors as well. Megawatts, not only it's at megawatts of growth, you want revenue drivers in terms of megawatts of growth, but when you look at things like virtual power plant, you want megawatt capacity as well. We could unpack, reliable, affordable, clean energy that's tied to those megawatts. There's going to be minutes interrupted. This is, look, if a customer experiences outage, I think that's arguably our number one goal is to make sure that we have reliable energy for customers. And then you've got metric tons of CO2 equivalents for decarbonization. So to the extent that we've got an ambitious goal so you can attract and retain the best talent, you've got clear ownership and accountability, and you're driving outcomes to what we call one of the 4 M's, I think those are the ingredients for driving innovation, at least in our business.
Thanks. I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
I had a session last week, and we talked about attracting and or retaining the talent that was necessary. So I do think that's a key point, and an obstacle that a lot of companies have to overcome. David and Kim, do you see any other hurdles or obstacles to that innovation process?
Well, there's always going to be hurdles and obstacles, I think. I think your innovation really is an obstacle course, if you think about it, because, you know, you start thinking you're going to go this way and it's uncharted and you don't know what you're going to run into, so you may need to go around or go over or go slightly a different direction. So I think if we think about innovation as it is an obstacle course, and I love the conversation a little earlier about, you know, working different muscles. And the ideal that we're building muscles to run this obstacle course, I think that really may be one of the key definitions around innovation.
Wow, great view. Kim?
I totally agree. And this goes down to the process. So with being able to measure each step of that obstacle course, you can get better at how and why. You know, like, why are the obstacles occurring, and then how do we build high-performing teams to be able to get through that obstacle course faster? One thing that I would like to inspire everyone in the room is to think about yourself when you go back into your organizations, is that you're the leaders, right, of innovation for your teams. And I would just say one thing: you're creating safe psychological spaces for your teams to come together and collaborate so that all voices in the room can be heard. Sometimes, right, we're in a highly engineering-driven culture. The introverted engineer in the back of the room might be afraid to speak up, right? So our job as innovation leaders is to make sure that everyone's voices is being heard in that discussion. And, you know, I would say it's more about plotting the vision so that there's inclusion and participation. And having the good fight, having the hole punching sessions in that obstacle course, because sometimes when your teams fall down, there's a really good reason for that. So that they have a safe place to be able to tell you, you know, like, why, you know, what are they encountering, and then how can you get better at helping them to become a high-performing organization or team through that innovation obstacle course. So I hope that's helpful. I mean, I think for everyone in the room, you all are leaders, you're thought leaders for sure. It's about creating that safe space so that all ideas can coexist together, and then you can help them collaborate and work through their differences so that you can get the best idea, not the most popular.
Wow, very good. And I love the way you threw in the word coexist while we're in Austin. I see that on the bumper.
Got to keep it weird.
All the time here. Yeah.
Well, and Mark, maybe I'll just add a few things that that I think about, at least, or that we think about at Portland General. One is progress over perfection. You guys have heard this before, but man, when you're in an engineering company, engineers do what they do best, and that's they engineer, right? And I don't mean that as a criticism, because there's a lot of things that we do that's life and death, but most of it isn't. And so we choose progress over perfection. Two, and it's kind of similar to progress over perfection, but it's pragmatism over dogmatism. Man, I'm sure that y'all have been in many meetings where the customer's at a level 2 on something, and we debate whether we should be at level 6 or level 8. 6 or 8, 6 or 8. Meanwhile, the customer's hanging out at level 2, and the pragmatic thing is just get them to level 3 next month. How about that, right? Instead of being in a proverbial ivory tower where we're sort of debating these things. So that's kind of another thing that I would sort of offer to the audience. And maybe the last thing that I would offer, and I've got a lot of other things too, but there's this idea that what I tell my team is the only thing worse than wasting customer money is just wasting people's time. So just call it, right? When you're innovating, you're going to see something. Define what success looks like, define what failure looks like before you get into it. That's my opinion, and that's how we operate at PGE, because if you don't do that, you're going to get a project that just goes on forever, year after year. People are going to ask for money for it, and you're going to wonder, what did we get into this for? Because we haven't defined what success or failure looks like. And maybe the last thing that I would offer to you, and we do this with every project that we do, is just think about Parkinson's law. And if you know what Parkinson's law is, it's that work tends to fill the time allotted. So you want to give something 2 years to get done, it'll take 2 years. You want to give something 2 months to get done, you'll find a way to get it done in 2 months. And that's worked pretty well for us, at least.
Wow, yeah, great thoughts. I had not heard that one before. I didn't know it was called Parkinson's Law, but thank you. Thank you for that. So a couple of really good ideas, right? I heard measuring. I heard some things from you actually around measuring as well. Any other thoughts or blueprints for maybe how do we bring that innovation cycle in a shorter timeline?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people think of innovation as the long pole in the tent, realistically, right? So what are some of the other thoughts or ideas you have around solving some of these things?
Yeah, I'll throw something out there and we can go kind of in the other direction. I always tell my team, I said, help me understand how, we had a storm that hit us a few months ago, 250,000 restorations. Help me understand how we can restore 250,000 customers in 4 days, but I can't get this thing that I want to do done in 4 weeks. And I think part of it, in my opinion, is because, many of us work in corporate offices, right? And it's somehow acceptable that something can take 4 weeks. And meanwhile, our colleagues that are in the field are getting power back on in 4 days for 250,000 people. So I just use that as framing because there is always a path. And I think part of that path is, one of the speakers this morning talked about culture, and I love that. And I'll give you my 2 cents on it. I think, show me a dysfunctional culture, I'll show you dysfunctional leaders. I don't think that culture is an uncontrollable thing. And I think that it starts with leadership. And so if you hold the bar high and hold people accountable, I think that's, in my opinion, how you drive a lot of innovation.
And David, I want to pull you into the conversation as well, because you said that this whole thing is obstacles, right? And we have to start learning different muscles. So at EPB, what are you guys doing to try to exercise those muscles?
I think
and navigate those hurdles.
I think it is laying out both those short-term challenges and those short-term opportunities. I mean, I can tell you back when we were looking at going without developing the whole roadmap, right? Is laying out the challenge without laying out the roadmap. When we were started building out our fiber network and we started doing stuff like installing customers, we started off at 50 a day, and I would go to our head of operations that was doing that and say, well, do you think you can get 75 a day? He'd say, yeah. 2 weeks later, he'd have 75. I'd say, well, do you think you can get 100? And 2 weeks later, he had 100 a day. It'd come time, well, do you think you can get 150? And, before long, he was doing 300 a day. But if I'd told him to do 300 a day from the very start, it would have created too much anxiety and fear. And so it's how do you lay out steps in a way that folks believe and create this ability, they believe they can actually do what you're challenging them to do. I think that is one of the, creating a space for them to have confidence they can do something is one of those drivers as well.
That's, that's a good point. It reminds me of Top Gun Maverick, where he's supposed to get to, I don't know, what was it, 9 or 10 Mach, and before you know it, he's pushing 11, right? I think the thing there, though, is it's great to push it, but you do have to expect there's going to be some failures as well, too, right, Kim? And you talked about measuring, but expecting to fail. How do you bridge that gap between those two?
So we're all about creating cultures of learning. You learn fast, you don't fail fast. And so if you have an innovation process that's able to capture the learnings along the way, that's the true value. So what we're really helping people measure is to say, not just like how long are we taking in the process, but how much value are you capturing in each step? So if we can create cultures of learning through rapid experimentation, back to the day of Thomas Edison, right? 10,001 attempts to get to the light bulb. If we're able in today's modern society using technology and SaaS and software and AI, how can we not get better, right, at sharing these learnings across our organization so that we can create, inclusive and diverse cultures of learning together? So it's not about, getting it right and sticking the landing. It's about what did I learn, and most importantly was the why. Why did we want to attempt this to begin with that? So we like to say when you create a culture of learning, you start with a really good challenge statement, connect to your mission and goals, as David was talking about earlier, and inspire your teams that what is the art of possible? What is the art of possible? And let them loose, right? And then capture their learnings and share it across the organization so that one person's idea can build on top of the other every single day in your workforce. It's not about a brainstorming session that happens on a whiteboard. These are these water cooler moments that we can now have virtually in these conference calls that we're all in on Teams together, where we're learning through each other. And that's what I get excited about, because it's the collective genius that comes from all of us participating in the process that gets us to the goal.
I love that term, collective genius, right? It takes a village. John, I want to go back to maybe what you guys are doing up at Portland General. Is there a conscious decision to have a diverse group of folks when you're doing this brainstorming? I think one of the things I talk about a lot is the aging workforce, people my age that are, quite frankly, on their way out, and refilling that pipeline with fresh thinking and new individuals, diverse thoughts across cultures, ethnicity. Is that a conscious decision when you guys pull together teams?
For us, it is. And I think that, as I sat through some of the sessions this morning, I'll give an example with customers, because I lead sort of the customer organization too, and I think that everything that we do should start with customers. If I think about our decarbonization goals, like many of yours, and I'll tell you stuff you already know, like we could build 1,000 wind farms on the other side of the Cascades, right, which is where most of our generation is. But you got to get those electrons into your service territory, right, because of the transmission sort of dynamic. So for us to meet our aggressive goals of 80% decarb by 2030, we're not going to do that without getting customers involved. And so in order for that to happen, it's not just the customer team that's doing this, but we have to work with engineering. We got to work with supply chain to get, procure a bunch of stuff to get sort of this, distributed generation that's in the territory. And I think when we think about innovating so that we can meet our goals, measurable goals, right, that I talked about earlier, the megawatts, the 4 M's, it requires cross-functional engagement for us to make that happen. And so it's not even just an invitation, it's kind of like a prerequisite. You have to do that in order to meet some of the more ambitious goals that you've got in the organization.
I guess, Dave, same question for you. Is it top of mind when you guys are trying to solve problems and always take that next stop? Is it a group of diverse thinkers so that you do have that collective team?
Yeah, it has to be a group of diverse thing, I believe. And we deliberate very intentional about making sure we have those diverse groups of folks that bring different perspectives to the table. Because if not, you're missing part of the ideal. You're even missing part of the problem, in a certain extent, if you're not bringing those. I think intentionality around that, bringing not just a group you historically leaned on to solve the problem, but different folks from different areas that bring totally different perspectives to the table.
I can't appreciate that. How do you ensure that those folks feel safe to work together and come up with different ideas while trying to make certain deadlines and targets, right? Is there any kind of magic sauce we should know about?
Yeah, I don't know that there is total magic. I think it is about, you know, encouraging folks to speak up, and you know, sometimes it's having the right people that are not in the room, right? So I think sometimes you find folks that are a little more outspoken, a little more driven, that you have to remove from some of the rooms and be intentional about that. Not that they can't be a player, but they may be ones that stifle others, and you have to be intentional about removing those from some of the conversations anyhow.
Wow, I love that one. Everybody thinks about who do we bring in the room to the table, but maybe not much thought about who we shouldn't invite in the room. Kim, I imagine you have those same thoughts?
Well, yeah, and so what's really cool about this, because you can actually measure it. Sorry, to measure everything. We are engineers here, and you can't manage, but you can't measure. So we look at 41 different cultural KPIs in an innovation process that we could start to see who is sucking up all the air in the room. And we do these innovation pulses as part of our platform that can say, after a hole punching session, you know, you guys got everybody together in this obstacle course of innovating together, and now we're at the step where, did I feel heard? Did I matter? Did my voice actually matter in that meeting, and am I feeling heard? And guess what? You know, through surveys and pulse checks of the teams that are innovating in real time, you can actually measure the cultural KPIs. And when you start to look at how your different teams on the front line are innovating together, you could start to see what makes up the high-performing engaged teams versus the disengaged teams. And it's easy. The disengaged teams aren't feeling like they matter or that their voices even, you know, were heard in that meeting, so they just stop speaking up. But when you have the highly engaged, high-performing teams that are saying, I have a safe place where it matters what I say, then you can start to see now through these measurements how your innovation performance is driving the high-performing culture that it takes to repeat and drive growth. So I would say, you know, don't be afraid to measure culture. It's possible today now. We all live in this Teams environment, and we can send pulse checks out to people to see how they're feeling in the process. And it is important to know how they're feeling. We do NPS scores to see how happy our customers are. When was the last time you did an NPS score for your innovators? And when was the last time you hugged your innovator? I'd like to say, hug your innovator today. It's time to go out to the front line and make sure that you as managers have hugged your innovator today, because it's a tough battle that they are pushing change in your organization. So their voices matter.
That's awesome. John, have you hugged your innovator today?
I have to check with my HR leader first on that one. So.
I assume you have like rewards programs or a virtual hug, though, to...
Oh, sure. Yeah, we have what are called Spotlight Awards, right? To highlight different leaders and the accomplishments that they've done.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to throw another question out there, and you know, this one might be a little more controversial because, again, I mentioned that innovation is sometimes seen as the long pole in the tent. I think the lady that was up here this morning was talking about the innovation around the nuclear facilities and developments and new tools, and she said it was basically a 10-year demo that we're in. That's quite a long pole. How do you bridge that gap between stakeholder or shareholder expectations in value with what is typically seen as a 10-year innovation life cycle? How do you get them to accept the fact, and when I say them, I'm talking about, again, stakeholders, shareholders, how do you get them to buy into the innovation cycle when the expectation is they want that stock price to go up in 6 months?
Yeah, you're looking at me, Mark, so I guess you want me to start?
Well, yeah. I'm gonna start with the CEOs, the CIOs, and the...
My opinion on this, right? So it's not an either or, by the way. That is sort of it's a red herring. You got to do both. You got to do both. You got to, you know, it's like the trilemma that we talk about with affordable, clean, and reliable energy. Yeah, you got to do all of it. And I think that's why we all have chosen to work in an industry that's solving some of the world's toughest energy problems. And I think that's what energizes, pun intended, all of us and our teams. And then to the extent that you're doing it for an investor-owned utility like Portland General Electric, that's a given. It's not a choice. It's not like, well, it's not like I tell our board, our investors, like, oh, well, do you want me to do this or this? It's like, yeah, you got to do both. And I think that, so I don't think it's a choice, number one. Number two is, how do you strike the right balance with that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the beauty of innovation, is that, I'll say something provocative. These are the most fun conversations, by the way. Sometimes I wonder, is it that we don't have enough money, or is it that we have too much money? Because we think that we can buy our way out of solving some of these really hard problems. Because I'm going to hire a consultant to go do something for me. I'm going to go hire some expert. When in reality, I think that for many of us, I think it's about looking in the mirror and being pragmatic and saying, well, look, if I had to do this, how would I do this? And I'll just give you one last example, because I shared this with a group last night. One of the things that I've done with my team is, you know, I was really frustrated when I first joined, sort of, when I was getting my group together, because everybody would say, well, John, I could do that, but I need more money and I need more people. And I said, why is it that every conversation I have is about more money and more people? I'm going to put a provocation to all of us in the room. If all it took were money and people, incumbents would never lose. And yet, all of our favorite companies, you know, have been innovated from nothing, right? So I don't think that it's about money and people. It's about drive. It's about grit. It's about creativity. And so I took my team to survival training, because I said, look, if we're cold in the forest, you want me to give you a lighter? Sorry, I don't have one. Oh, can you have any matches? No, I don't have one. All right, you going to roll over and die, or are you going to survive? And so that's part of building this culture, I think, of balancing the expectations of stakeholders, you know, in our industry. So I think you got to dig deep, and you got to find a way to do it.
No, I totally agree. Thanks for that. And David, I want to throw it back to you. As an executive yourself, is there ways or a process by which you maintain that balance or bridge that gap between expectations and the life cycle it takes?
You know, I don't even think necessarily the life cycle is always, there's only one finish line. I think there are multiple finish lines that showing that how you can accomplish things. I'll go back to stuff like when we put in our fiber, and then we automated our electric system. We basically broke our electric system down into megawatt-size pieces that are automated between. You know, we knew that long-term, that positioned us in a great place for adding distributed energy resources, because we already have our system broke up in megawatt-size views. That wasn't what was important to our customers then. What was important to our customers then is they got 50% improvement in reliability. Oh, and also we had to be able to tell them what that meant, because folks don't know what they don't see. That's one of the interesting things, challenges about our industry. If you don't have outages, our customers don't appreciate it because they don't know that, right? So since we were automating things, that was typically we would dispatch trucks and open and close switches if cars hit a post to reroute power. Now that was happening in a matter of a few seconds. You know, we started telling our customers that when you saw that, that was our smart grid keeping their lights on. So you have to find ways to share what you're doing, both internally and externally, and your incremental progress along the way towards the bigger goals.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're doing both internal and external outreach, because nobody knows what they don't know, right? So you do have to have that outreach. I'm going to give you all an opportunity, because there may be some innovators out there in these chairs. to do some outreach. If you had a 2-minute elevator pitch to say, this is how we innovate and this is how we support innovation to the folks out there, what would you tell them to come and join you at EPB?
Well, I think I would tell them that folks have ability to contribute at EPB first off. And that, because innovation in a culture is not one giant thing that everybody thinks about. It's not magic, really. We think about innovation, I think, as magic, but it really is a lot of hard work. It's about making things happen and being part of something bigger than what you can do yourself. And it's about giving folks that opportunity to contribute at a level that sometimes may be uncomfortable to you or to them itself. Because I think the little things on giving folks drive the bigger things. You know, I've seen times where there are, I had to learn, really, there are times where you go out and if you're not careful, somebody will share a thought with you, and you can shut that thought down pretty easy because it don't align with your way, right? And so making sure that it's not your way, that's the only way, because frankly you find out there are many ways to accomplish things, and the more you can allow others to accomplish things, the better off that you can achieve things together.
Wow, great. And I'm going to get back to you in a minute, Kim, but I did want to ask you, John, same thing, 2-minute elevator pitch to the innovators out there. What would you tell them to attract that talent to Portland General?
Yeah, so I started, first of all, I think all of us are innovators. I think if we were all stuck in a forest, I don't think we would roll over and die. I think we'd find a way. So I think that's an invitation to all of you and your teams. And I would say, from a PGE perspective, I shared it when I started the panel this morning, set the bar high, ridiculously high, impossibly high, because the best, in my opinion, that are out there, they want to solve these problems. And if you don't set the bar high, I don't think they're going to want to come work, in your respective areas. And then hold them accountable as well. Because when you start getting that diffusion of accountability, that's where people start to wonder, like, they don't really care about this. Because if they did, somebody would be held accountable.
Okay, thank you. And Kim, I was going to save that for you last, because I know you're driven by innovation by a good friend of ours, Hobo Leo.
That's my dad.
And if anybody wants to learn more about Hobo Leo and Kim's relationship,
hi, Dad.
Please feel free to ask her after the session here. But what would you tell folks as well?
The hardest lesson I had to learn when I was leading an innovation team was, because there's so much that you have to do, right? You're the vision owner, you're trying to make things happen, you're leading a team, you're trying to drive growth, you're gold and measured in every way, right? I had someone take me aside and say, Kim, you're now an innovation leader, you're the spark. You are not the idea owner, you didn't come up with the idea, your job is to inspire your team to have a safe place and let them solve the problem. That was the hardest thing for me to learn, because it was like a survival instinct for me for almost 20 years that I always had to have the answer. They could throw me into the survival, pit, and it was like, okay, I had to know how to survive to get from point A to point B. And then when it was given to me that now you're the innovation leader in our company, you're the spark. And I got a bracelet that said on my arm, be the spark. My job was to be the vessel. It wasn't about how I answered the question anymore. It was how my team was answering the question and giving them the space and time to creatively come up with the answers themselves. So I know we all have a clock and we have measurements and we have things we need to do, but honestly, we get there faster if we could be the spark and the vessel for our teams to collectively come up collaboratively with the idea and then let them try it out. And you'd be shocked, when, especially in utility world, When we go into organizations and we say, we're going to be able to get you through a field trial in less than 90 days, they laugh at us. We get them through field trials in less than 30 days. The hardest part was ideation and knowing what to do with the idea. 200 days we were measuring a utility. It took them 200 days to figure out what to do with ideas. And once we gave them a process and the leadership skills, they were processing ideas in less than 2. So be the spark for your organization, give them the places to know where to take their ideas, and let them solve their own challenges. It's not about you solving their problems, and tell that to your board, because they need to know that as well.
Okay. Hey, that was great. I really appreciate the conversation. I'm going to open up. We got just a few minutes left. Do we have any questions from everyone I can't see from up here?
Hey, great job, by the way. This is an interesting topic, something I enjoy talking about and hearing about. My question is, you guys talked about innovation and developing this culture on that. So the enemy to innovation is the status quo. And I guess my question is, how do you balance that innovation and also avoid falling into that rut of status quo?
Anybody want to go first?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. It comes down to leadership, man, and I'm big on ownership and accountability. And I tell my team, like, when I walk in the morning to my office, there's a Portland General sign up, and it's not like I stop and I wait, and it tells me, okay, John, today you're going to be slow, you're going to be bureaucratic, you're going to say no to everything. That's silly. It's ridiculous, right? So when we talk about culture, sometimes I feel like it's an abdication of responsibility, in my opinion. I'm going to be provocative. So how do you get in front of that? Be the leader. Like, you be the leader. And leadership is as much what you instruct as much as what you tolerate. And there's stuff that happens around us all the time that we tolerate, right? And there's nobody to blame but ourselves, in my opinion. And so I think it starts and ends with leadership.
Can I say something really quick too? So I think it also has to do with burnout. I think, and this is a beautiful opportunity for your organization, as you're driving an innovation process, address burnout. Because I think people are tired, like we're trying to do way more than we can handle in a day. And then we're asking you to innovate and come up with these creative and awesome ideas on top of it. So the PSA that I would say for this is embrace mindfulness. There's it's really easy to bring meditation and mindfulness into your workplace and help the folks that are innovating and solving the problems, help them address the fact that they're probably burnt out, and really think about that as part of your innovation culture. Because for me, if you could help folks realize that they have safe places to come up with their ideas and collaborate, but also take care of themselves, you're going to be able to drive the best ideas out of your organization. So I just wanted to mention the burnout. It's real. It's happening right now, and we have to address it.
I guess in the last minute, David, same question. How do you avoid that status quo?
I couldn't agree more with both John and Kim on that statement. I think the one thing I would add is that I think that part of our role as leaders is just removing those obstacles from folks. And some of those may be having the wrong folks that may be having too much burnout, or maybe what all pressures are on. But I think part of the role ends up being removing obstacles so we can move forward.
Perfect. Well, our time is up. I thank you for the question. I do want to say a special thanks to our guests up there today, David, Kim, and John. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you all.
Thank you, Mark.
No, we have to go to the next session. You can. All right. We have our last session of the day, and it is a fireside chat. So, as we start this last session, it's really focusing on changing the industry's thinking. So part of the whole Keep Earth Weird theme stems around those interesting innovations that people always think, that's not gonna work, that's never gonna work, that's a weird idea. And it's those ideas that usually are the ones that rise to the top and are most successful for our customers, for our communities, for everyone. So with that said, for our last fireside chat of ETS, our 10th anniversary, please welcome Navneet Trivedi to moderate our last fireside chat.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my panel. So I know that many of you are getting ready to catch flight, and we want to keep it as exciting to keep you here. So let's see how we do that job. I was thinking about this panel because when Z Prime asked me, they gave me 2-3 options of 3 different panels, and I chose this one. And when I looked back, I said, wow, why I did that? And then it stuck to me that my personal journey is about this, changing the thinking in the industry. So I was a consultant for 15 years. I worked for industry for 7 years before I co-founded Vrinda. And that was in 2014 when I came out, leaving my high-profile job. The reason I did was I really wanted to make the change happen in the industry. And I was feeling very constrained where I was. I was working with one of the largest management consulting firm, and I always felt that sometimes we are not able to tell the client that you are going to die, change, because we make $100 million contract from them. So that motivation I came and started, and it's a terrific journey for 8 years. My panelists are already kind of leaders. As you know Paul very well, he has made some big stride in the industry as a utility leader about change. And Sean, who is my co-New Yorker, we both live in the same island of Manhattan, is making the change happen on the ground. So we are going to hear from this panel today just to set the context of, though the topic says changing the thinking of industry, I would love to have this say changing the thinking of stakeholders. Because industry means people think either we are talking about utilities or technology provider, but there are 4 key stakeholders. Number 1 is customer. We all have agreed that customer is the center of the universe. Now we need to work around that. The second is the utility. And I was very critical. I am always critical about utilities. And the reason for that is I spent 30 years working with utilities. I never worked in the utility. And I say that I love you and I want you to change. So that is the second stakeholder. The third is the technology provider, solution provider. Many of them are here. I think that there is a need for change there. And the last one, which is the most key where I think that utilities hide, is the regulator and policymakers. So in this panel, we are going to hear the thoughts about this changing the thinking of at least these 4 stakeholders. So I would like to start with Paul and then Sean, you may like to introduce and share when somebody says changing the thinking of the industry or stakeholder, what comes to your mind?
Well, thinking of it, so I think one of the interesting things right now that if you work in the electric industry, this is a very, very exciting time. This is my 41st year with the industry, and I think the last 5 years is only time my kids are actually interested in what dad is doing. So that's the first thing. So I think when you talk about change, I think there's a couple of things that's driving the change in the electric industry. I think the first and foremost, I think the whole world is trying to address the climate crisis, so that you have now the whole world aligning to say what are the steps that you need to do to address climate crisis. And when you look at the utility, we're dead in the center of actually affecting people's lives every single day, integrating renewables, and doing our part to try to change not just the power sector, but really also the transportation and the building sector. But I think when you talk about change in industry, I think we were talking a little bit yesterday before the panel, it's kind of the changes start at the top. And so, I'm very fortunate that I have a very, very forward-leading and, a board that really cares about its community because elected officials, that they actually took the time to actually talk to our constituents and our community about what needs to change. And we heard it loud and clear. They were very, very, very appreciative of the board actually changing its mission and vision for utility. So you talk about changing the mindset. So they changed to, in the past that we're electric utility, we always give, safe, reliable power, right? And then, you want to talk about environmental leadership, but that's kind of just part of our DNA. But then when the climate crisis hit, when they talked to our constituents, our cities and the county, they said, you know what? The climate crisis is here and it's real. And SMUD, being an anchor institution in Sacramento, we're changing our mission. We want to improve the quality of life for our community that we live on. The sole reason for our existence, our board really stated, open statements, that that's really why we're here. If we don't improve the quality of life for our community, there's no reason for us to exist. And in fact, they went one step further. They said, we're not only changing our mission, we're also changing our vision. Our vision is to be a powerful partner and a trusted partner for inclusive zero carbon economy. So we can no longer, just think about, our customer as our ratepayers. We have to think about our customers and our community as a partner. I think you hear the theme here, this whole conference is really about, we can't do it by ourselves. Utility can't do it by ourselves. We have to radically change the paradigm how we look at our customers. Because our customers moving forward with buying electric vehicles, putting solars in, right? They're doing things, that they can do right now, for a lot of them, to how do you address climate change issues. But you heard the panel this morning, Angie, when you actually do the customer segmentation, the challenges for low-income and underserved communities is very different, right? And so, how do you actually making sure that when you go through this energy transition, you're doing it equitably? So, and I love your comment this morning about really, when you're about changing this relationship, all the stakeholders, you not only just have the utility itself, you have the customers, you have the city and the counties, you have the regulators. Now, our board of directors, 3 of them here today, it's only one part of it. Now, you also have the city and the state and the federal regulators that we're part of the regulated industry. So how do you actually engage them, to be a partner itself? And then you also talked about, well, how do you actually engage the private industry, right? So you heard this morning about innovation. So the reason why our board actually put forth this big, bodacious goal, John talked about this morning, right? We have set, I think, one of the most aggressive goal of any large utility in the U.S. We're committed to go to absolute zero by 2030. Currently, right now, our plants emit about 2 million metric tons of carbon, and we want to go to zero by 2030. And we actually have a follow-up plan for those who are interested, how we're going to get there. And on top of that, one of the things that we said we're going to look at too is really looking at how do you making sure that you do it equitably. So that means how do you actually engage the community. So that's how we're actually looking at it. It's got to be a holistic approach. It's got to be all the stakeholders that you're talking about.
Thanks. So Sean, I used to come to your boss fighting for change. That's how I got to start working with Con Edison, because Matt Kashke, who's the president now, when he was the SVP of Utility of the Future, I used to come to Matt saying that, Rev, why not we are implementing what the change. And since then, I have seen a lot of change happening. So, and one of the reasons you have taken some special role now to engage with contractors and communities is like a real kind of change in Con Ed. So just like to hear about that from you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for sitting in here today, and Paul and Navneet. Very good panels to be on stage with. A little bit of stage fright today, so had a late night. Interesting note, I always see Navneet out of New York City. I've never met him in New York City yet, all right? So when asked to be on this panel, I absolutely had to join him on this stage and make sure that we do connect when we're back home. Systems over time are resistant to change, right? I think we could all agree with that. And I think that a lot of people have the perception that the grid has been slow to change. But when you think about it, all of the systems, our energy systems, whether it's for electricity, transportation, heating, they were very siloed, and over time now they've come together, right? We're able to provide customers, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, one set of service offerings that you could get your energy from. I'm going to share a story about adaptive leadership. The gentleman on the last panel said leadership was one of the key fundamentals for what needs to happen. And there are adaptive challenges and technical issues that are clearly need to be defined. And this story I'm going to share is about Marty and his 95-year-old mother. His 95-year-old mother still drives, very independent, lives by herself. Marty lives about 4 hours away. So when he drives up to town to see her, they have dinner dates. She drives independently on her own. She even drives at night sometimes. And over time, Marty starts seeing scratches on her car, more and more scratches over time. Now, there's an easy fix to this. The technical issue, take it to a body shop, get it fixed. But the underlying issue is the adaptive challenge that needs to be addressed. So how do you do that, right? Marty's mother is 95. She boasts about being able to drive, maybe the only one of her friends that drives and drives at night nonetheless. There's a sense of pride in that, right? And that resistance to change. She would have to take the technical solution, call an Uber, maybe ask a friend to pick her up. But the adaptive challenge is what is she losing by giving up that independence, right? That pride that she has in driving. And that's kind of what we need to be faced with in our industry. So as it relates to the market, contractors, distributors, our service providers, these are some legacy companies, industries that have historically been very successful in managing the business the way that they have. And as a utility partner, we have to be neutral, right? We can't favor any specific vendor, contractor, regardless of how well they perform. So what I've been able to start to think through is how do we implement standardized, objective performance metrics where if the market is performing well, right, they all have the opportunity to achieve a new level through these metrics, then they could be rewarded, right? And that allows me to remain neutral, right, because I'm not favoring one over the other. They're actually just achieving these different targets, which unlocks a lot of the potential for the business that they could provide to our customers because, quite frankly, they engage with our customers more than we do at the utility. They're in their homes, they're in their facilities. They're offering them solutions on behalf of the utility, but we have to make sure that that messaging is clear and that our objectives are aligned, right? So the adaptive challenge is how do we help them make that change and not have that sense of pride to say, you know, this has worked for several years, right? This is how our industry is operated, and this is how it's going to continue to be.
Yeah, so you kind of already divvy up into the contractors or the third parties. So we'll start with that. And the reason I don't want to discuss because you both are from utilities, and my strong belief is if it was 5 years ago, I would have said that utilities, you need to start changing. But this is like an elephant which has kind of started moving. You know, it had an inertia, but like now you see every utility is on move. So utility is doing their part in my view. Means you can disagree that they are not doing all of them at the same level, but utilities have moved. I think I want to challenge and hear your thoughts when it comes to contractors, you know, technology providers, what change we need. And the reason I came passionately in this, because I felt that everybody was bombarding utilities and utilities were saying, oh, we are slow to change this, that. I said, no, you put them on spot. For example, I work with a lot of technology providers and say, what's your business model? And the guy says, oh, I love business model. I said, what's your business model? He says, I would love to make a business model. So the thing is, from a technology provider's point of view, what has been seen, that they are still looking for same contract from you, that you pay me full money, guarantee the payment, I don't want to put my skin in the game, and it applies to the VCs who are funding these startups. So the thing is, we need to change their thinking. If you want innovation, for example, you bring a new technology in front of a utility, your company has not existed for even 5 years, you are asking the utilities to buy it for 40 years. How that is possible? What the model in which utility and ratepayers are protected? So, Paul, I would like to hear, I know that you may not like to say like very directly, but I would like to hear from you like what you want from the industry to change.
So I think this is a paradigm shift, right? Just like the utilities traditionally are very risk averse because we have all the rules and regulations, and just like the VCs, when you have VC capital funding in, they have all their rules and regulations they got to follow. So I think really is that, we really need to actually bring the industry, the technology folks together to say, here's a problem I'm trying to solve, right? What is the best ways for us to solve this problem? And develop strategic partnerships so that you actually have skin in the game. So both of us, if we both succeed, widely successful, we both gain. And if we fail, we both fail. So I think this is one of the interesting things that we actually have approached our board to even change some of our strict directives to allow us now to have strategic partnerships, that we actually having joint ventures with private industry, which traditionally we do not do as a publicly owned utility. But we actually have successfully kind of change our policies and guidelines and really make it easier for some of the smaller companies that maybe it's not as proven. That, you talked about in the earlier panels that, sometimes our purchasing, and supply chain is quite restrictive. So we need to understand when you're working with some of the smaller companies or some of the technology companies, what are really some of those barriers that we need to actually help them solve their barriers. At the same time, they're helping us, solve ours. So this is really about that collaboration that we're talking about. But it's actually more than just collaboration. It's really about taking concrete steps to develop partnerships, MOUs, and share savings and share risk.
Great. So, Sean, I want to, because one part of your job you describe is to develop the contractor networks and relationship, the trade ally. And very recently, working in New York, we have very interesting experience. So I work on a heat pump program for Long Island, and contractors have burned the whole budget because somehow the incentives were covering 97% cost. So the funny part was the Con Ed had to stop their program in May because of the same problem, but LIPA didn't know it. So all the contractors, because if you know geographically, Long Island and Con Ed, New York City is side by side, so same contractor moved other side, and they did the exact same thing. So the thing is, we are all kind of for empowering the contractors, but like the contractor communities is not looking that way. They just like, okay, you're giving me, I'm not telling you that this is like too much kind of incentive, it's not going to, So what is your kind of view on the contractor side, like what you look from in terms of?
Yeah, thank you for teeing up it's the Clean Heat program, which is a statewide program that's geared towards incentivizing heat pump technologies so that we could electrify heating loads, whether it's for space heating or domestic hot water in New York City, and New York State overall. So that program, we had to pause it. So we like to say that we hit our 2025 goal in February of last year, right? Which to anyone would tip their hat. But with that achievement also went our budget, right? So we exhausted the entire budget. And we had to file a petition for additional funding to the Public Service Commission. So kind of the same way we are investor-owned, but we're also a regulated utility, which put a pause on the growth of that market, which is not good for business, right? We got all of our customers excited. We got manufacturers, distributors, contractors on board, and then we ran out of money. So lots of lessons learned there. We could have done a better job of communicating that to Long Island so that the same mistake wasn't made. I think California ran into similar sort of exhaustion of funds, as well as Colorado, I believe. So there's something to be said about the bigger markets and how we can mitigate this risk. Now, we did also see this when we launched lighting about a decade ago. Contractors were installing light bulbs in closets, in crawl spaces, in attics, in places where they weren't really used, and claiming savings. So we could have had some lessons learned there. What we're doing now is we have moved away from capacity-based incentives, so now it's per dwelling unit or per home or facility that's electrified, and really holding them accountable, right? We have to make sure that, that they're good partners, right? We reward them for innovation, and we relaunched the program January 17th of this year. Haven't seen much uptake yet, but we are providing them with more resources now. So I just launched a clean heat financing program to help fill in the gap between the incentives and the upfront cost of capital to our customers through various channels of leasing agreements. So that's one thing that I'm helping out the PC network with, and educating them, right? Holding focus groups, roundtables, working with the manufacturers to see exactly what the right price point should be for the technologies, and then rewarding those that are incorporating low global warming potential refrigerants as a solution for our decarbonization needs. But it has to be a two-way conversation. We have to hold them accountable, and we have to hold ourselves accountable for making sure that we have good actors in the market.
Right. So I think we all know that I'm not trying to criticize contractors. They are good and bad. The point is not that. I think that relationship and the partnership, that knowing, you know, I have this goal to achieve and how we can work together to achieve it rather than you just repeat me and like, you know, you met my 2025 goal by just burning my money. That's not the thing. But I think in this context, there is another barrier or like a stakeholder which need changing is the regulator. Because most part, the regulator says to utilities, your role is to give these incentives. Your role is to do, but your role is not beyond this point. So clearly, Paul, I will start with you that there are some regulatory barriers also, that regulatory side, the thinking need to change. And it's a very difficult, like nobody wants to say to the regulator that you need to change, but I go to like very other countries also in the conference and they said, oh, what regulator, how? I said, you know what? The regulator is a guy, he is just there in the other side. That doesn't mean that he is more intelligent than you. In fact, your utilities, you know better. Maybe you should do something and go and tell him that this works. Can you write a regulation now? So I can say these things because I am like not a utility, but the point I'm driving to is that from a regulatory point of view, because a lot of these things like, you know, like Con Ed, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this. Your job is just to hand over these things and then monitor. And like your hands are tied in some sense. You know where the problem is, but you cannot go beyond that. So what kind of things you have seen and what you would like to see the change there?
So actually, Smartest is actually doing that now, and we've been doing for quite a while. So one of the major changes that, you know, you talk about this partnership. And the foundation for any good partnership is trust. And you need to develop trust, just like you need to develop trust with our community and our customers. You need to actually spend the time to develop trust with the regulators. You really need to understand, you know, it's a regulator's job to provide those safeguards, right, you know, for the industry. So, and then there's also policy objectives the regulator is trying to accomplish. So you really need to actually invest the time to really understand and get to know the regulators. What are they trying to accomplish, right? What is their fear about, you know, when they put all the regulations in place? And then also spending the time to understand and actually, in a way, make them aware and educate them. When they actually change those regulations, what the impact that it has for us, but not just for us, you know, because they know the utilities, but it's really about the impact it has on our customers, both business and industrial customers, right? And how does it, you know, by whatever they're putting in, is it really helping the state's policy objective moving it forward, or is it actually detracting? So people will need to spend, and all of us, I think the industry needs to spend a lot of time instead of seeing the regulators, well, they're regulators, you know what, and we'll just go ahead and kind of, I don't want to say fight them at every front, but really give, you know, inputs. I'll criticize, you know, one of the things that's not right, but also encourage them when things are going well and how their policy is actually helping. So it's really spending the time to really rethink the relationship, not just look at them as regulators, but really as a partner that we help them to actually advance their policy perspective. And the regulation they put in place is also helping us help them to advance, you know, their policy objectives and give them assurance, right, the confidence of safeguarding it and making sure that we with that partnership. And so and it takes time to do that. So I think the utility really need to stay thinking about, and not only just our company, right, is you need to bring the partners along. So the other utilities, because there's more power in numbers, but then also bring the folks that usually are not on the same camp as you, like bring, you know, the technology companies, the manufacturers, the EJ communities, right? And even maybe bring your state regulators to go talk to the federal regulators, so that making sure there's alignment along the way.
John,
Yeah, I would just add to that, Paul. You know, making sure that the policies that are set are all driving us in the right direction, right? Because there's a lot of inconsistency there. Like the grid is connected, but the policies are not necessarily connected. And that could lead to a lot of unintended consequences. Like we just decommissioned a nuclear power plant. And as we're phasing out gas now, we're starting to see that over time, the emissions rate were going down, but now they're going back up, right? So the policies are set for net zero, for decarbonization, for electrification, right? And phasing out the gas system, but right now, the emissions factors are increasing, right? So making sure that the policies are all leading us in the same direction. The same thing's happening within the circular economy, right? When you think about they want to implement reusable materials, so they may reintroduce plastic, right, and get rid of paper, right? So it's thinking through what the policy is intended to do, what the intentions are, how to get there, and holistically looking at, how could we come to some sort of alignment?
Jason, we need the regulator next time here. Remember that. So the last part of this stakeholder, which is not the least, is the customer. And one of my belief always was the customers really don't want to know about what you're trying to do. They just want their lights on, right? Because they are sensitive, they love the environment and all, but it's not like they are kind of, dying for that to kind of make the change. There may be some of them, but not all of them. But we know that as we are going toward grid edge technologies and more, customer participation is inevitable. So what is the change from a customer point of view we need, and like how to get that? Like, it's a big thing. First of all, customer is not one monolithic kind of thing. It's a low income customers who have no means, to the industrial and informed customers. They are very intelligent people, and everything in between. So what's your thoughts like on the changes on the customer side and how easy or difficult it will be?
Well, I think what it is that, you have to think about the customer very differently. And I absolutely agree with you that customers are homogeneous. The challenges that a low-income customer faces to think about this energy transition is very, very different than some of the higher income. So you really have to, first of all, meet and understand really the challenges on the different segment of customer that you have, but also be willing to engage them where they're at and really understand what the issue is. So if you're talking about the low-income customers, that is actually a worry about putting food on the table, paying their rents. It's very hard to have a conversation about what this energy transition is. So first of all, I think we need to engage the customer in a way they understand what the value proposition is. Why is this clean energy transition important for them? And how it's going to impact their life? But more importantly, are you willing to put the resources available to address those challenges? So for SMUD, for example, we actually did that. So we actually have mapped really all the different disparate communities that we have, from income, demographics, health, air quality. And we're saying that, well, here's the challenges, and if you actually want customers to participate in your program in this transition, what you need to do? And it came up that you need inclusive workforce development. You need inclusive economic development. You need to help me actually, make my community better. So we actually created a community impact plan, and so sustainable, and we're actually putting resources to help those communities, and not only those communities and those customers, but also the organizations that provide the services so that they can actually have the resource to come and give us the input. Right. Because a lot of times, I think you heard Angie talk about this morning, those people that you really want to hear from the most are least able to afford to do that. Right. So therefore, you need to make sure that you're very, very conscientious about providing resources to do that. And so that's really way we're looking at it, is making sure that we meet customers where they're at, we actually understand what the challenges are, we actively work together to try to solve those challenges, to bring them along and making sure they're part of this transition.
Right. So I will just give like little kind of twist on this customer thing. So how our programs can be off. In New York, we have a program for low-income customers to get financing. Now, if your air conditioning is broken or heat is broken, you have to fill up a form, then it goes to a financier, he will make a decision, and he may give you an answer in 90 days. Now, imagine any of you who lost heat in a cold winter, can you wait for 90 days to get a decision? So that's an example of like how far we are, like when we are not meeting the customer. And low income customers, they don't have even minimum credit score and then so and so forth. So meeting the customer is very important. Sean, would you like to say something about like how we meet the customer or how customers need to change?
Yeah, I think that I want customers to see themselves as part of the solution, right? And really come to the table with ideas and not really rely as much on industry or even figure it out, help us figure it out. It has to be a partnership and a joint collaborative. Something that I've been dabbling with is how could we create non-conventional coalitions, like working with the faith-based community to see what their needs are? Because everyone goes to church, right? Not everyone, but people that go to church convene, they have different needs, and we can learn a lot from what they're thinking about, right? Or how they're engaging in the community. And really building that trust, we have to leverage trust from organizations that have the trust of those communities. So whether it's a community-based organization, business improvement district, whether it's elected officials that have the trust of the community, which is kind of tough to say, right? But we only have 5 seconds, so anyone wants more information on that, we could talk after the panel.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, we are very excited people, so we took all the time here. But in the end, I guess we all realize this, there are many stakeholders, and the change is not like one side, like people say industry is they're thinking utility need to change. I think what we demonstrated here through discussion, there are all other stakeholders. This is a big kind of change management kind of exercise here. And bottom line of all this thing is the business model need to change for everybody. How you make money, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a customer, whether utility, so all have to kind of, come to the table with the open mind. I would like to kind of pause here, and if somebody has any question, but otherwise, we can kind of talk, and if anybody has any last minute thought, Paul or anybody to share.
Well, first of all, does anyone have any questions first?
Yes.
I can't see, we can't see out here.
Yeah, if anybody has any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, it's the last day of the conference. They're ready to go home.
Okay, great. So, yeah, if nobody has a question, then if you want to have any closing remark about this.
Yeah, I think the closing thought really is that, when you work, at least from a utility perspective, I think it's really, important that you understand the needs and challenges of your community or, all the stakeholders that you're talking about, and really investing in the time and money and efforts to build that trust. Because without the trust, you're not going to get the collaboration and the partnership that you're looking for.
I would just say that we're looking for partners. We don't have all the answers, right? We want to lean on your experience and really drive this change collaboratively. That's the only way that we're going to get this together.
So I thank you very much for this, and thank you all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Navneet. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for this last session. Just want to say, appreciate you all coming and staying out here, especially I've seen some of you for the past 4 days. That's amazing. Thank you to all our sponsors for supporting us, all the utilities for coming out and supporting us, and just a big round of applause. They're here for our staff, if you don't mind. ETS is our big Super Bowl. It's the one project that every one of our staff gets to collaborate in, so it's truly special for us, especially on this 10th year. Sarah Frageau is our event director. Probably all of you talk with her. Rich Ahee, Chris Holt. You don't see them up here on stage, but they do so much to make this a great experience for you guys. So if you see them, and to our AV folks, catering, they do a great job, and we just very appreciative of all of you for coming out here and make this ETS 2023, the 10th anniversary, very special. So with that concludes. We'll be announcing 2024 soon, but thank you very much and have an amazing weekend. All right. Happy Easter.